Okay.
Hello, hello.
Hi, it's ready.
So, yeah, so thank you so much for being here, everyone. We have a very, very special guest today, which is probably the reason why everybody's here anyway. So it's Bruce Sterling, everyone. This is Bruce Sterling, the real person. So this is our first panel of a series of conversations that we're going to have today on this topic of alien aesthetics. And the first panel is going to be me, Bruce, Leon Marvell, the wonderful, and Patrick Pound, together with our co-host, Jason Adams. Can somebody move Jason here, please? This is Jason. Okay, Jason is here. All right. This is Jason. Jason, I have to move in.
Okay.
So, let me say a few words for you. So, why are we here today? Because of Bruce, basically. He's basically the reason why we're here today. We had to think about something that would be interesting enough and that would be appealing enough for a person like him, right? So me and Jason, we had many conversations, like, what should we talk about? What is the next page? What is the next topic? What is maybe the next conversation? What's the next conversation we should be having? And after a lot of brainstorming, we thought about alien aesthetics. And why? Why did we think about alien aesthetics? Because the future is alien. It's a very close relationship between the concept of the future and the concept of something which is alien. The future is always related to the unknown. The same thing with anything that is alien. It belongs to a dimension which we do not comprehend fully yet. So both the alien and the future, they present us with the same sort of challenge. And they also make us realize our limitations, how limited we are as humans in terms of our cognition. And so our gathering today is about taking that wild walk into the unknown and move forward blindly into the unknown. And as we move along, whatever it is that we encounter along the way, if we have to give it a name, let's give it a name. Let's give the transitional name of alien. Let's call it alien. That whatever that is that we encounter as we move along the unknown. So each one of our guests here today has been walking on that wild territory. Every single guest we have here today is a speculative thinker, is a speculative artist, speculative practitioner that has been engaging actively in that dangerous walk in the wild. So while we move forward in our experiments and maybe try to map out the contours of whatever it is that we encounter along the way, I'd like to invite Jason from the new Center of Research and Practice to kickstart the event. as both a panelist in this first panel, but also as a facilitator. And Jason has been an amazing intellectual stimulus for me. My conversations with him have really had an impact into the way I think, and it's a great honor to have him as a co-host today. And Jason, welcome to our alien aesthetics.
Thank you very much, Renata. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. So today I'd like to open this panel by considering just a bit further the manner in which Renata was talking about how the future has emerged for us today as an alien presence. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Okay.
Yep.
Has emerged for us today as an alien presence, but one which is not generally present to us in the present as it might be preferred to be. As my ongoing theoretical muse and former teacher Paul Virilio noted in his book, The Futurism of the Instant, our time is the time of presentism, in which we live almost exclusively in now time, the time of instantaneity, of immediacy, and other types of instant kind of presentist forms of time, with little grasp of the past that brought us here, and even less grasp of what futures might await should we begin to construct them, or further still, what futures might already be informing our present retroactively. Because the future is even less perceptible or imaginable to us than the past under the regime of presentism, it's quite right to suggest an affinity specifically between the future and the alien, which remains equally opaque for us, whether we are backwards-looking localists who rally around our local cities and regions and nation-states, or seemingly forward-looking globalists who celebrate globalism, humanism, and other such binary thematics, which really only make sense in juxtaposition to their outside, which is globalism that they're supposedly parting ways with. One manner in which alien futures are already imminently present in the present is via technology, particularly in the forms of telerobotics, like this double robot that I'm currently operating. Via the double, I can, when it's working properly, of course, I can physically move around the room that I am quote unquote in with you, even though I am also in another sense not physically in the room with you. We cannot say the same about radio, television, telephones, or even more recent technologies like Facebook, Skype, or Google Hangouts. These remain non-maneuverable, and thus are essentially tied to terrestriality. They're essentially globalist technologies which collapse distance between local spaces, but don't really allow for maneuverability in at least conceptually, infinite number of possible locations and situations, including, most importantly for our concerns, extraterrestrial locations or alien locations. The double and similar telerobotic technologies are important developments in terms of the question of the alien, because at the present moment, it's only through them that humans can become capable of dynamically exploring extraterrestrial space in a manner that's irreducible to the physical body, which will, of course, age and wither away eventually. Be that as it may, the same telerobot sent into space today can be operated by representatives of future generations, well beyond individual lifetimes, which thereby makes it a singularly alien technological object, in numerous senses of that term. All of this, of course, is to say nothing of artificial intelligence or AI, which is a topic I hope some of our panelists will address later on. But the point in what I restrict myself to here is that telerobotic objects such as the double mean that human exploration is no longer simply bound by the average or even an artificially extended human lifespan, which means, as ruptures in time always do for the possibility of ruptures in space, that we've entered into a form of immortality already, aside, that is, from the question of the battery, I suppose. And as the Russian cosmos hoped for, the result is that the potential space that humans can traverse and even maneuver within and manipulate in ways that were never before possible has expanded tremendously. So we have then entered into an extension of the human, or now the post-human sensorium that knows far fewer bounds than it did previously. And in this sense, I think it's the perfect time to introduce a concept of alienism to replace that of humanism as the most dynamic mode of subjectivity or the most inclusive mode of subjectivity available. And I think the closing panel on xenofeminism will go quite some distance towards articulating what such a mode of subjectivity might look like, or asubjectivity. But for now, we're concerned with this panel, of course, and it's often said that it is in art rather than philosophy that we encounter glimpses of the future, or for our purposes, glimpses of the alien. And there are already signs of this future appearing today in the films and other thematics called to our attention by Sterling. Sterling, for example, has referred to the question of the alien in relation to cinema by pointing to the emerging phenomena of design fiction, which is kind of a variation on science fiction, but basically design fiction mini-films, which are a form of science fiction adapted to the brevity of our period, and concerned with the deliberate use of diegetic prototypes to suspend disbelief about change. As he said, this is important for alien aesthetics because, quote, realistic aliens, like the postulated inhabitants of Jupiterian gas-backed planets, aren't going to show up in Hollywood movies because they're hard to dramatize on a movie screen. What kind of dramatic dialogue is the screenwriter going to pen for an imaginary creature that lives for millennia, breathes liquid ammonia, and is a couple of kilometers across? As a result of these more realistic aliens' maladaptivity to the dramatic form, such films are also hard to find funding for, at least on the Hollywood level scale of production, distribution, and consumption. But Sterling says, quote, one might do a pretty good 5-minute Vimeo-style FX film about intelligent alien centipedes, i.e. design fiction film. It would have a niche audience, but it would also have a niche cost. Nowadays, we've got the technical capacity to visually dramatize truly startling things effectively on a small scale. So I think with those types of ways of thinking about it, we can imagine a different aesthetics, and it makes sense that an alien aesthetics would also be based upon emerging cinematic forms, based upon newer technologies such as Vimeo, and that sort of thing. So I'm really looking forward to this panel, and with that, I'll turn it over.
It's really thrilling to be quoted along with Paul Virilio, especially by a face on a metal stock, which is kind of awesome. So I'll take that and run with it because I think this actually is like an aesthetic problem. So, all right, yeah, we've got like these methods of looking at things we've never seen before, like say a certain comet which recently passed around the sun, where it has the European Space Agency probe on it, and the Philae lander, and then like an encounter with the planet Pluto, which is like sort of last planet that we hadn't seen. So these two things are full of real surprises. I mean, they're just really alien worlds that nobody had seen. We're not likely to see this comet again. Pluto wasn't discovered until the last century. It's the most obscure world in the solar system. So we're looking at them, but we're not really looking at them because every image that we've gotten from this comet or from Pluto's system of moons is digital, just like our co-host face is digital. And there's no likelihood of anybody landing on a comet because it's extremely dangerous. They're just really unstable places. And very little likelihood that there will be anybody on Pluto in the lifetime of anybody in this room. So it's either digital images of these things conveyed by machines or no images at all. So we know they're all digital. So we just have to like live with that. Okay, we got our machines, we have Philae, yeah, its battery ran out, it's really a shame. We have to come up with some emotional way to get happy about that. It's like, come on, little robot, we're pulling for you. We're like anthropomorphizing the robot. It's like, we built it, he's great, he's got his own name, he has a crowdsourced name, the public's watching him, he's up on the web. It's like, yeah, the robot's on the web, he's landing live, the robot's landing live. It's like we're all pretending that Neil Armstrong is there. Of course, it's just machinery. But the alien aesthetic problem is like, which is prettier, Pluto or the comet. So, like, okay, well, you could say that Pluto's bigger and kind of more important than the comet, and there's like more things to name on Pluto. So people probably should be more interested in Pluto, and therefore Pluto should be more aesthetically attractive. But actually, the comet's sort of gorgeous, right? It like does this fantastic thing within our lifetime. It kind of blows up and steam's flying off it. It's got, dunes on it. Who knew comets had dunes? It's easier to explore than Pluto. Our relationship with the comet's more intimate than it is with Pluto. Pluto's kind of coming and going. The comet's coming and going. It's got a narrative. On Pluto, practically nothing happens that we know of. It just takes a zillion years to go around. So, all right, how do we make a judgment along that line? Just, is Pluto beautiful? And in what way is Pluto beautiful? Are comets beautiful? I think everybody from every culture would agree that comets are beautiful. Every time anybody's seen a comet, they've been very moved emotionally. Like when a comet lights up the sky, it signals the death of princes. It's like a huge omen, like a fantastic thing. And people eagerly hunt for comets. We have comet collectors. But what they really like is the drama of the comet coming and going. If there was a comet that was permanent, would it be any more exciting than Pluto? I don't know. So what I'm looking for is like some method of figuring this out. It's like, how could I argue convincingly that Pluto is more beautiful than the comet, or vice versa? I mean, what kind of aesthetic structure would legitimize my judgment there, right? So, I can't say it. Pluto's more purple, and the comet is brighter. That's not, or the comet has a certain kind of shape. It's shaped like a rubber duck. Ducks look better than planets. No, but I've got to come up with some kind of metaphysical hook.
Well, we also, I don't want to interrupt your thought. I'm sure you're going to continue. Well, we have the problem that already there's been some mediation in terms of the way we perceive these two objects, Pluto and the comet. And that is, the scientists or the visualizers who get the algorithm,
Hey, mate.
they are transmitted to us already, whether they, either that or Frankenstein's monster. I have a few words to say.
I'm eager to talk about Homage behind your back.
All right. Where was I? I can't even remember. All right. Yes. So these images are not images when they arrive on Earth. They're algorithms. We have a group of people who are obviously, maybe there's a new job description of visual. Take algorithms, turn them into something that we recognize. So whether Pluto is a little more gorgeously settled down the comet has already been decided before we, you and I, see those images. So we're in this strange position where there's this new elite, and I don't know their backgrounds, who've decided the sort of images that we're prepared to see and understand. So before we get to that question of which is more beautiful, Comet and Pluto, some of that argument or some of that notion has been taken away from us.
Well, let me just respond to that, because I think that's super important. And I don't want to take away your thing here, but yeah, the guy who's running the algorithm and doing the image combing guy is the responsible party there. He may not be an artist, but as an image visualization expert, it's important that he be able to have some framework to make these decisions. Like, when the comet arrives, the comet's actually blacker than coal, right? It's very, very black. So if you have a human being in the space of the probe who's looking at the comet, he sees nothing. He just sees blacked out stars, right? But the comet has onboard image analysis systems that can actually bring out the character of the comet and present it to the human eye through this visualization. So, knowing that I am, in fact, the elite visual master, and I have no problem with him being an elite visual master, I just want him to be an honest and consistent elite visual master. What is his framework for telling the rest of the human race what the comet's actually doing? I mean, how is he supposed to produce it to it so that we derive the feeling from it that we would we should feel from our encounter with this alien world.
Yeah, yeah, good point.
Actually, a lot of the this particular comment project is very heavily feminized. There are a lot of women on this particular effort. Okay, Your Highness.
The other thing I was thinking of, more whether it's pretty or not pretty, or which is prettier, which is crucial, is also, for me, the future tends to get opened up to what's useful tends to be where we go of these things. That image making is often about making things useful and things we can't see useful. I was thinking with this robot here, it's a typical future thing that it's here in park, but it's sort of it's double parked, and it's a bit like the camera that can photograph. You know, you can get an analog camera, you can photograph a star that no longer exists, but not only is that dead star that's still up there because light travels so, takes so long to get here, you can photograph that star with a camera, and the star actually disappeared before the camera was invented. So to me, that's a bit like this thing here. And to me, futurism, the default position of where we go tends to be what's useful. And so anyone who wants to make things happen tends to ally themselves to usefulness and money making. Give it a market.
I'd like to get Bruce's response to that, and I'm just going to do this little addition. I sort of put futurism these days in the same category as I do the sort of political rhetoric we get from around the world now, like prosperity coming down the tube. This sort of illusion, prosperity, progress, futurism, I seem to, for me, become empty signifiers of a political elite. As a futurist, Bruce, how would you respond to that?
The calendar is going to keep turning no matter what your attitude is towards some profession. The future's on its way at the absolute rate of 1 second per second. And no matter what language politics you want to launch against it, it's going to bury you. So, it's an objective reality. And we have various methods to deal with it. I mean, yeah, it's true that under a capitalist society, people are basically paid to be motivational speakers and market assessors, rather than to make, a different kind of assessment of what the passage of time actually means to human race and society. But we're still going to have that problem. I mean, Pluto's not going to go away. Comets aren't going to go away. We now know more about Pluto than we ever did. It's an irrevocable understanding. We will never return to the earlier days of not knowing what Pluto looked like. In 2015, we knew what Pluto looked like, sort of, kind of. We know what our elite visual guys have, and I would expect that to be subject to revision later. It's like, we've got the data, well, I'm going to do the reinterpretation of Pluto. We've got the color coding wrong. It should have actually looked like this. And the actual Pluto is so far from the sun that it's very poorly lit. The human eye can't really make much sense of it. All we could say is, all right, we know there's a particular kind of rock here. This has more reflectivity than that other kind of thing. But if you were standing on Pluto, literally in a spacesuit, you'd scarcely be able to see anything. It's a twilight world, right? So it has to be broken away from the natural, and it has to be presented to our sensorium in an artificialized way.
Can I historicize this just a tiny bit? And I'm only going back to the 80s, I think. I remember when I saw Star Trek, The Next Generation, first movie, whatever the hell it was called, and I was sitting around with a bunch of friends discussing its merits and saying, how's about that Hubble space field? And they said, what? Did you notice the way the stars were represented in that film? It was no longer black with white dots. Suddenly it was multi-hued and rainbow-hued. There was the horse's head in this glorious rainbow colors. And not a single one of them had recognized that in this movie, this first time ever, now it's just part of the course, but that film, suddenly the star field was completely different. The space in which our heroes were traveling was now Hubble telescope colors. And I think, I could be completely wrong, and somebody here can correct me, please, but my supposition is those visualizers with the Hubble telescope were the guys and gals who decided this particular aspect of the algorithm, this is a nice crimson, this is an ultramarine blue, and perhaps what we're seeing now with the comet and Pluto is that palette that was decided in the 80s.
That might be how it happened, but I bet good money that they actually encountered some people. And there are groups of people in Washington who like sit around offering expert scientific advice to filmmakers. And they will put you in touch with actual astronomers or anybody you want to talk to. It will work, relatively cheaply by Hollywood standards. So my suspicion is that they actually found somebody who is an astronomer and a Star Trek fan, and so they said, "Why don't you set these guys right on what modern astronomy looks like?" And he's like, "No problem. Got gigabytes of it right here on the old thumb drive."
Okay, can I just interfere a little bit? I'm dying to listen to you talking about Holly stuff. Because alien visions, right? It's not just about the eye, but it's basically about a vision of the world. And aesthetics and politics right now are basically the same thing, right? No? So tell me why not then?
Well, I think you can have a political aesthetic, which is like, Nazi political aesthetic, where things have to look in a particular way. But I don't think aesthetics actually coincide with politics. I mean, there are areas where they have to coincide because they both have roots in metaphysics, but you can't make metaphysical arguments about how things look that are inherently political.
What about Nazi Germany?
Well,
Indeed,
that's Nazi Germany
Italy.
is like the cliche of all cliches, but I would point that out. I mean, all you have to do to ruin a photograph of anybody is put a swastika in it, right? Like, wow, what a great movie. I was like, oh, well, you can try it. I mean, just like go out in public with a swastika on your hat and see if people overlook it. And it's like a swastika is not an aesthetically ugly thing. I mean, the Hakenkreuz is actually kind of geometrically interesting. But we've all been trained to, morally react to this particular political sign. And every time you attempt to impose a political order on an aesthetic order, you end up with a Nazi order or, scientific socialism or, socialist realism or even our own forms of capitalist realism, which is sort of imposed on things that are pretty and make them look more like ants. So, it's a dangerous area to go, and it doesn't really advance stuff very much. But, by all means, let's gossip about Holly, because I think this is really important. And it's easy to sort of say, okay, alien aesthetics is very abstract. It's like we're trying to talk about things human beings can't see, things human beings can't hear, things human beings can't perceive. Why would I have any interest in this? Well, the reason you would have an interest in that is that some of it can, in fact, be dragged back within the human sensorium. You can go and capture things that are alien and humanize them. And in fact, you can have things that are human and have them become alien and kind of fall off the far end. So, Holly has made this record called Platform, which I think highly of, because she's like in there tinkering with her platform. Literally, it's a record that was made entirely with a laptop. And she's like struggling with the texture of sound to try and like algorithmize sound. And it's experimental music, but it just sounds different, even from techno music, which is, based on a rather simplified set of sound warping devices, Roland 808 synths or whatever. Here, Holly has like found these particular forms of software that actually like crack stuff, and it sounds different, and it sounds very much of this decade, and it doesn't have the backward-looking feeling or the nostalgic feeling that even the best techno music has now. If you go out and do like a really great techno track, it's like, yeah, that was as good as 91, which is, a difficult place for music to be in. So I appreciate what she's doing. It's a difficult music to listen to because it has sort of genuine sonic novelty to it. But I think what's kind of working there is the singing. Because, Holly likes to emote over these tracks, and she's kind of lamenting, really. And she's specifically lamenting about the problems that are involved in using computers to relate to other people, or having intelligence services look through your computer, or having strangers comb through your data, or, the sort of emotional difficulties of trying to talk to a boyfriend who's far away and only a presence on a screen. when what you really needed was, you know, somebody to make breakfast and take out the trash and do kind of useful boyfriend things. And, you know, I think that there's a kind of integration there between the stuff she's doing with the laptop and her kind of emotional reaction to it as an artist that really felt to me like the way forward. I mean, that's what's really compelling about it. It's like, yeah, it's alien, yeah, it's really fragmented, but I'm also like dragging my feminine self, you know, right on top of this thing and like going ahead and allowing it to make me vulnerable. You know, and this is like actually makes it an important record, in my opinion. You know, I'm like keen to see what she does next. You know, but may God help her, really.
Amen to that.
I'm completely unfamiliar with this album, but now clearly I'm going to have to listen to it.
I happen to have it here on the laptop, my good man.
By the way, I have an announcement to make. Bruce Sterling will DJ for us. So I was
So
I was waiting to drop this bomb on you. I didn't want to drop the bomb on you before, but
if you've
I'm
got a
making
lead over there, Mr. DJ, that'll run off my Mac. Yeah,
No.
whatever. Yeah. I'm afraid you might run out of wires. You don't seem to have enough.
We can listen to Holly.
It's a lead act.
You can play Holly for us, actually, later on.
I happen to be quite the Herndon fan and have an extensive collection of rare Herndonia.
Get ready. All right. Jason, you want to say something? Anybody from the news center wants to say anything?
Would anybody like to say anything? I just want to give a brief report, a brief update. It looks like Holly may still be able to come, and if she does, it'll be about 3 hours from now, so towards the end.
That's great. The Berlin After Hours Club. I'm all for that. She happens to be in Berlin now, I know, and you know, they should be looked at.
And we're gonna send her the video, and so she'll be able to hear what you said, Bruce, and then she'll reply to it later.
I'll ask her for forgiving me for making fun of her on Twitter. That would be good.
Anybody else want to say anything?
I'm quite interested, before we actually hear the music, what makes Holly's work different from other audio artists, musicians who are using laptop technology, glitch music, etc., and singing over the top? What makes it, you know, different for you?
Well, you know, I would defer to her if she were here to talk about it, but you know, it actually sounds different to me, and I'm not a musicologist, so, but you know, I know what the sort of typical, you know, sound grooming things in techno actually sound. You know, and there's like stuff going on in the background of that. I mean, she's just doing something to the waveforms of the sound that sound different. They've been shredded. They're not glitched. You know, I mean, glitch is generally an established performance structure. Like you got a piece of tape, and then you go scrape up the tape with your can opener, and then you run it through the tape, and it goes da 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 da, and it has a certain kind of sound and mechanical breakdown. Okay, the stuff that she's done to the sounds that are sort of, you know, sample delica, you know, it's a mixture of samples and generated sounds. But she's treated them, and she's got some kind of algorithmic treatment of them, and they just don't sound like previous forms of digitally treated music. I mean, you know, they're not pop songy, although they have kind of a pop song length. They don't go like verse, verse, chorus, chorus, and yet there tends to be a melody in it, and the voices aren't glitched. I mean, her voice is a human voice. So, I don't know, I think she's just showing good taste in doing whatever she's done. She's doing sound design, right? She's doing like sound art and sound design. And I'm used to that because I like hang out with guys who are into that. It doesn't bother me. But she's doing sound design within kind of a pop music context. And, you know, I think it's that she doesn't think like normal techno musicians think. She actually talks a lot more like a new media artist.
Right.
So, you know,
That's because of her process, because of her creative process is very conceptual and collaborative. For me, the most important thing in her work is actually the process. She especially for platform, for each track, she basically collaborated with designers, philosophers, artists, various kinds of thinkers and artists, and she's always in a dialogue. And for me, that's just a very I don't even know how to describe it because it's so new and relevant, especially to me. Like I'm very interested in collaboration and collaborative processes.
No, I would say, yeah, that's one of the things that interests me about it, that it's so hard to describe. So, it's like a form of music that doesn't have a criticism that's associated with it. Yeah.
As someone who also doesn't play this music, it reminds Renata's description of it reminds me of that 60s New Zealand poem, the Castleberg poem about tomorrow will be the same but not as this is. You know, we recognise it, but it's new.
So is it?
It has the shock of the new to it. You know, and unlike a lot of techno, there's a kind of emotional urgency to it that I think comes across very powerfully. You hear most techno music, you know, even really good techno music, you sort of feel like we could hit the F1 function key and make an infinite amount of this. And you know, that really wouldn't work with a Holly Herndon track. It's not something you want to, you know, groove out to all night. You don't want the extended dance play version of one of these things. And on the contrary, they're kind of harrowing, and you're like somewhat glad she's not suffering anymore when it kind of goes away.
Anybody here amongst us who's familiar with the music and would like to have a few comments about the music?
She might show up at any minute, you never know.
That'd be great.
It's easy to talk about her when she's not here.
Yeah, hopefully the keyboard's like burning at this point.
Her ears are burning in Herndon land.
Yeah, she might still be able to join us. Let's wait and see a little bit.
You know, I think there are many people who can imitate her software or just use it, but I don't think there are many people who would have her approach or her process. And you know, I don't know what her process is, but it seems to be working. It's kind of a cool,
yeah, definitely.
Good, actually.
Definitely.
I mean, there's some Herndon tracks I like better than others, and I don't think she's necessarily top 40 material. But you know, I would rank her with like Laurie Anderson.
All right.
I think I had a similar effect at the time.
She
I mean, somebody
might,
who's like very intelligent, kind of from the art world, who suddenly shows up in the pop music world and says like, "I'm going to play my violin with a tape loop." Like, what the hell? You know, and then you realize she's actually singing about something, and you realize, okay, here's like a woman musician who's like really got a fresh voice.
Excellent. Jason, can you let us know if she's going to be able to join us, or if we should move on to the next panel?
We can actually move on to the next panel. She'll come back in, and we want to give her a chance to listen to the video and hear the remarks that were made. And
okay.
When she comes in, it'll be at least 2 hours from now.
Oh, all right. Let's move on then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Jason.
Thank you.
So our next panel, we're going to talk about alien sounds. Our next guests are Sean Redmond, a science fiction expert from our very own Deakin University. We have Adam Hulbert, who has been very kindly piloting the sounds for us, and Tony Yanick and Lendl from the New Center of Research and Practice. So right now, Fabiano, we need the Hangout screen right now. Okay. So Adam, why don't you start the panel, just telling us a little bit about the research that you're doing and your process, and how does it relate to alien aesthetics?
Okay. Yeah, sure. We need some more ladies up here. I'm feeling. Wish Holly would come better.
Well,
Yeah.
Holly was supposed to be. Holly's supposed to be joining us at any
I
moment.
was listening to her album actually.
Cool.
Okay, so alien aesthetics. I'm interested in the way that creating sound also creates a kind of subject that listens, right? So you can't really have a sound in practice without a sense of who is going to hear that, without a sense of what are the qualities of that. And you know, I was interested to read some of the kind of early Pythagorean schools of teaching. One of the earliest things you would have to do would be to learn how to listen. And, you know, Foucault's kind of touched on this, that you would have a certain bodily posture. You would be required to be silent. You would sit in a certain way, you know, and in my kind of studies into this, I've been looking at how has that kind of tradition that started pretty early, this tradition of discipleship of listening, kind of continued on through the ways that buildings have been constructed, through the way that synths have been created, and how can we step outside of this centralized subject, right? If this is something that we're being co-opted into in some way, how can we then take control of that process and decenter ourselves? I don't have an answer to this. I saw some pretty awesome lip syncing on RuPaul's Drag Race. There's a whole lot of ways I think that we can do it, and you know, some of it's through lip syncing, some of it's through dancing, some of it's through specific music practices, some of it's through immersion. So Schaefer, who you know started a acoustic ecology with other people, and you know, it came up with this idea of schizophrenia, this idea of experiencing a sound that's not from a source that you can immediately see, right? This kind of separation, and he saw it as a fairly negative thing, but he also said something really interesting, which was that when you listen to a schizophrenic process, one potentially useful thing is that you can immerse yourself in some kind of alien subjectivity, right? He didn't use the word alien, but he used other. So you can listen to other people's conversations, you can listen to a stream, you can listen to another place. And, you know, he was saying that by immersing yourself in language, you learn that language. He suggested that by immersing yourself in sounds, you can learn the language of that acoustic sound space, of that space. So I'm wondering, what kind of immersion can we do to kind of cope with this kind of influx of data and this intelligence of machines that we're finding ourselves surrounded in? You know, maybe music has a role aesthetically in helping humans to kind of catch up to that soundscape.
Thank you. I love the reverb on this mic. It's like meeting my own doppelganger. It's fantastic in real time and space. I like him. He's a good dude. If you're listening closely, you'll hear the alien in every footstep, every metallic twang, every horn beep, every wet kiss, every encounter, every escalator ride, the wind banging at the back door, cars, parts. And you will hear, if you listen closely and intensely, the sound of alienation everywhere. When I was a kid, back home in Coventry in the UK, and when I was supposedly asleep in bed, but wasn't, I'd turn on the analog radio that was in my room and play it. And I'll tell you what I did. I hope you can hear this. So what I would do night after night, well, not night after night, sometimes I'd dream of other things, but I'd turn the dial on the analog radio, deliberately trying to find the space between radio stations. You know, the scratch sound, the sound of whoops and wails. And I would imagine, as I half closed my eyes, that they came from outer space. That the alien sounds were in my room with me, dancing in the shadows as I would slowly fall asleep. I think this idea of alienation and of alien aesthetics, of alien soundings, aren't just out there, no matter how enchanted that idea might be, but here with us in the present, in every social encounter. And the more that we listen, the more that we hear the world in strange and alien ways, the more it opens up itself to new possibilities.
I would certainly agree with that, and particularly in relation to radio. What fascinates me about radio is that it's this relationship with electromagnetism that we just didn't have before. You know, the same way as once after the war, and artists got hold of hydrophones, you could suddenly start to hear the undersea environment in a wholly different way. Kind of similar thing with radios. There's this vast, it's a hyperobject, right? A hyperobject of electromagnetism that we'd had a relationship, but there was a whole lot about the relationship that we didn't know and we didn't understand. And radio kind of started to allow people to listen into it. And early in the States with radio, they'd have silent nights. This time when people would DX and listen into very, very distant radio, but also what they would be hearing is so much electromagnetism, right? So much of this, what you could call alien, if you wanted to. I mean, it's of this planet, it's not of this planet. And then there's so much that after that people have started listening in. Philip K. Dick famously heard people from another planet talking through his radio, and initially hassling him, but eventually kind of on his side. I remember when I used to kind of live in inner city Sydney, someone just kind of walked through the door once and started playing the radio and playing static as a musical instrument, and it really had, that was quite an evocative performance. So yeah, certainly there's this new relationship, each new kind of way of listening, each new sounding is a new relationship. And I think that we can, partly through developing this technology, partly through this kind of immersive process, we can kind of open ourselves to a kind of alien abduction, right? We can allow ourselves to be taken away, or transported is the old classical feeling of experiencing new music. So yeah, I guess in that sense, this idea of radios as a whole that you slip into some kind of elsewhere is something that really fascinates me. And I love the fact that, for many, many decades, these holes to this kind of alien elsewhere sitting in rooms all across the planet. So I'm interested in what maybe now are the equivalent holes. Like, what are the things, these relationships that we edit out but are actually there, that kind of abduct us at any point and change us?
I would like to listen to Lendl, actually, because Lendl Barcelos is one of our guests today here, and he's a sound artist, but he's not only a sound artist, he's an installation artist as well, and his work is very, very interesting, and it's multi-dimensional in a way. So Lendl, can you tell us a little bit about the multidimensionality of your sounds?
Oh, hi, Lendl. Multidimensionally everywhere.
Hello.
Where is he?
Am I audible?
Can we have Lendl in the big screen?
Is it working?
There we go.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know where to wave.
Schizophrenia, yes. Being in two places at once. Let's see. I guess in terms of my work, or what I'm looking at, what I'm researching at the moment, the guiding question which relates to this panel is, what does sound technology think sound is? Now the problem with asking that question is how am I going to alienate my thought in some sense? such that or at least bracket my thought and my habitual patterns or my doxastic conservatisms, whatever you want to call it, such that I can think sound outside of my own head, or at least outside of my own thoughts or my own normative modes. Now I agree that an emphasis on listening is really important to do this, because I wouldn't know what the production of an alien sound would be, because I would just be producing a sound within my own capacities, within my own affordances. Yet there are plenty of sounds within the sonic range and outside of the heard range that are completely alien. And what I mean by that is, depending on what sounds you're hearing, that specific experience actually conditions the rest of the sonic field. Like if I'm hearing a pitch that's at, let's say, 777 hertz or something like that, and I pause it and then I play another pitch at 779 hertz, I won't necessarily perceive the difference, yet there was a difference. So there's something actually outside of my perception there going on, or at least there's some infraperceptible phenomenon going on that in a very real sense is alien to me. That experience is alien to me unless I have the trigger of knowing or like being told or seeing the frequency and number or having some kind of technological auditory apparatus. So I'm kind of interested in these spaces where you actually need some kind of medium, external medium, or some mechanism to get towards something that actually, within your experience, is very difficult or at least impossible to perceive. And at least that's where I think that's where I would situate some kind of alien sonic. It could take some kind of radicalized or at least alienated listening practice in order to achieve that from my perspective. Yeah.
I mean, I'm intrigued by that idea, because one thing that strikes me with that very, very minute difference that you're talking about is that we could see that really easily, right? If you had a spectrograph that was of the right kind of resolution, you could quite easily discern that. But hearing it would be really difficult. Where does the alien slip in this space between the visual and the heard? Is it just through that kind of meta context that you...
Michel Chion calls it sound in the gap.
Sorry, go ahead. Nice. It's tricky to say. I mean, I mean, another way of saying it's not... I guess not necessarily something that's outside of physical capacities that I want to kind of point to, because I think that the alien actually is conditioned by whatever normative frameworks you have. If I enter into some kind of context and then all of a sudden I hear something and I just think, what the heck was that? In some sense, before I've recognized that experience, it's alien to me in some very real sense. Just as an example, there's a lot of, well, I don't know about a lot, but there's people now kind of exploring autoacoustic emissions as sonic practice, where they're producing sounds that trigger our ears to produce their own sounds, and then you hear the manipulation of your eardrum as music or as sound. I mean, that to me, when I first experienced that was totally wild.
Look,
I wasn't
there's something else.
Go ahead.
There's something else as well, which is this sort of weird. Oh, look, he's moving.
Now break.
Okay. All right. So that's sort of a, like silence all of a sudden becomes really noisy, and a lot of people are experiencing that. Whenever you have total silence, you hear that zoom. Zzz. I have that. How do you explain that? Like the noise of silence. That's alien to me, and it's alien and inherently human at the same time, right? It's connected.
Yeah, I think, yeah, totally. And I think it ties into mediation and this kind of, these layers of mediation. So, the human hearing apparatus is a kind of habit, right? It operates as it does now because it suited us in the past. And slowly over time, it's going to change depending on what our needs and affordances are as a human. You're right, it's not fixed. So we kind of have that, but there's always this kind of alien operating on that because I think we try to enfold it in structures that remain permanent, right? And I think a similar thing happens with mediation. So if you look at a piano as a type of mediation, if you look at the interior acoustics of this room and amplification as a type of mediation, you have this kind of mediation on mediation. And as soon as there's any slippage in that mediation, we get to what Lendl was talking about, these kind of interstices, these cracks, where something slips through and we don't know what it is, and it no longer sits within the framework that we were used to hearing already to hear.
I think there are more of those than you might imagine. I think what Lendl's after is this idea of when we experience the reality at one moment in time, which for a moment language fails us. We're caught in this reverie or sublime state when the sound and the image, and touch and feeling, hearing and seeing are sort of overcome. And that can happen in so many situations. I remember standing on the station in Wellington in New Zealand, just looking at the cranes above us. But for a short second in time, not being able to give them meaning, language or identity, just being completely lost in their shapes and sounds as they moved across the skyline. And those radio frequencies on an analog radio station, they are sound in the gap. There's no mouth, no voice, seemingly disconnected atoms across time and space. The more we listen, the more we hear, the more we find the alien in us.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I think maybe that kind of experience that you're describing is something that drives a lot of people into exploring aesthetics. I know I had a similar moment where I deliberately listened and refused to name things as I listened, and that was mind-blowing for me. Like, it totally changed how I saw the field, because it took me into just, I don't know, an effective state that I still can't explain. I spent most of my time now thinking about what that means, Yeah, so I think that type of removing framework, it's almost as though, as you were saying, Lendl, it's very hard to compose an alien aesthetics, but it's kind of easier to allow it to emerge as an emergent phenomenon by removing things.
Beautiful.
Perhaps.
Do you know the British band Hawkwind?
Yeah, great.
Come the fuck on. There's an example of sound in the gap of a band through all sorts of mechanisms and measures could produce that alien reverie, I guess, in their performances and in their incredible soundscapes.
I mean, I'm also interested in what machines can tell us about ourselves. I feel like I'm getting old. At the turn of the century,
Which
of
one?
This recent century, I had a 2SCR in Sydney really kindly allowed me to take the latest of late night slots and just kind of play what was going on TV at the time, on commercial TV, through a sampler and mutate it based on algorithms. So it was this sampler allowed kind of cascading effects that were based on random and LFO kind of interactions. You can set up the initial conditions, but once you've set it up, it's a very simple algorithm, but it's really unpredictable. I would never know what would happen. And all of this happens through the Gulf during the Gulf War. So what I started hearing through these newscasts of the Gulf War really changed my experience of that mediated experience. You know, and the sampler I was using was a Yamaha sampler, and I think Yamaha helped build the military technology. So there's this kind of strange space where the machines that are kind of framing our people's existence, framing the media, and framing everything, can also talk back to us and tell us something new about our own practices.
I think that Tony would have a lot to say about this, because it's about his research. So I'll let Jason introduce you. We can hear what he has to say about this.
Okay, so Tony's a PhD student at the University of Glasgow. He's studying film and media philosophy. He's also got a background in with a bachelor's in computer science and software design and an MS in computer engineering and robotics. And Tony's also one of my partners and an organizer of the New Center. So I'm sure you have plenty to say about this.
Hi, how are you? How are y'all doing? Yeah, so kind of a little bit outside my field. I've done a little bit. I've been with sound for a little bit. I've been in bands, played music. But mostly I think what I want to bring to this conversation is two different projects I think that are doing some interesting things, at least expanding our epistemological framework and like kind of exposing our relationship with electromagnetic fields from electronic tools, such as computers, phones, and these things, and also basic algorithmic ways to regenerate sound, produce sound. So there's an interesting project happening called algorithmic sorting, or algorithmics, which is a play on words. It's algorithm, but also rhythmic, as in, you know, RHYTHM. And so Shintaro Miyazaki has developed a bunch of interesting work in media archaeology, working with Wolfgang Ernst, and he's developed, if people don't know about it, he's developed a device called these devices called detectors, which actually detect the electromagnetic fields of different electronic tools, and you can walk through, you can experiment with these things. And after I just intro it a little bit, I'll add a link to the Hangout, so if you guys want to play the videos, there's a few videos where you can actually listen to a cell phone trying to access the network when there's no SIM card, or just pretty much the process is happening on an actual laptop. But another interesting project that he's been doing with Michael Shinen is he's been doing this. He has this new software. It's open source called algorithmic sorting, which is actually it's actually a learning tool for researchers and people to be able to analyze the diversity of different of sorting algorithms and these pattern generating behaviors. So like the bubble sort, the merge sort, the quick sort, the heap sort, all these different kinds of sorting algorithms you can generate and play, map out visually, but mostly it's about hearing it, the sound, or just basically the loop structure of each selected algorithm. So he's using, in different interesting ways, using this detector device that he's developed in order to sort of see the different like organizations and abstract structures of algorithmic formulas. So this is one example of, I think, a project recently that's quite interesting to this group. The second one is actually one that Lendl, I'm stealing from Lendl from one of his talks, which is MIT has a visual microphone application. They were originally working, were working on magnifying the visual images so they can see like prenatal babies. They can watch them from a distance in order to see that they were still breathing. So they were magnifying their chest. But what they found was they actually could implement this and use it behind a soundproof wall and visualize objects, play sounds in the natural environment. And because they were able to magnify these objects, like natural objects like a bag of chips, glass of water, these things, they can detect the micro vibrations, and they were actually able to regenerate. Mary Had a Little Lamb, I believe, was one of the tones that they've been experimenting with, and these sorts of things. So this is all very much in early works. It's a side project of this medical device they've been doing. But I mean, these two tools are I think very useful and necessary, I think, for today. And I think those are. I just wanted to bring these examples.
Yeah, I love those examples, and having heard that Mary Has a Little Lamb, it's a pretty haunting rendition. It's interesting to hear how the surveillance technology hears that compared to how we would.
Have you got a favourite film soundtrack that does, what do you think, captures this sense of alienation?
Favourite film soundtrack?
Thinking of, I don't know if you all know it, Under the Skin. Incredible composition of soundscapes to create this alien world on Earth. Wondering if you had.
I'm going to say no to that, but I wonder what is it about this connection between film and sound that is so important. I mean, in that example, you have sound resonating off a packet of chips, and it recreates a visual, I'm lost in a labyrinth of what's translating into what now.
It's actually the micro vibrations. It's the vibrations.
It's a visual. It's the vibration from the sound, isn't it? Bouncing off light, off the chips, then turning into light, then coming back as sound.
It's
right?
It's the It's the vibrations that the sound is actually. The sound is actually hitting the bag of chips and vibrating. It's just a level that our vision can't see. So when they're detecting it with these high-level cameras, they can detect the actual sound as a physical object.
See, I sometimes wonder if there's a precognitive element to some of these algorithms. So if you'll excuse me. But so, okay, so what we're listening to now, which I've just kind of kept on a loop, is the freeware open source Paul Stretch software that's playing Olivia Newton-John 71.7 times slower, like just one bar. And to me, this sounds very similar to a lot of orchestral and ambient music that I really love, that came out prior to this algorithm. And I wonder if there's stuff being done with cinema and sound that has come out prior to reflection, the algorithmic rendering of the reflection on a chip packet, that kind of still sits within that space. I'm just putting this out there as a speculative question, I guess.
That was a beautiful bridge. Thank you. Wow.
I just want to mention something actually related to both. Hello, is that okay?
I don't know where to look.
You're good.
Lendl, it's because you can't see him, but he's there.
Floating in
there
the
he
background. Sorry, I was alienated for a moment. But no, in relation to this time stretch that we're hearing, I think time stretch is a very good example of like something like a new process or formalism coming into sonic practice that actually alters habitual modes. Because before, I mean, we're all sort of used to, or at least I think most of us are used to the fact that if you slow down, like we kind of sort of idea that when you slow down a piece of sound or music, that the pitch goes lower, right? It's sort of like, you kind of see films going in slow-mo and we know that they go slower and slower. But time stretch actually like separated, it separated out pitch modulation from temporal modulation, which was like a completely different way of approaching how you know, because before it seemed like those were inextricable. You couldn't actually separate the change in speed with the change in pitch. But with the example that we're hearing, which I can't hear anymore, so I'm assuming that it's paused, or maybe it's just muted to me. This ceases to be the case. You know, which conceptually actually is a major shift. You know, if pitch and rhythm, or pitch and time, I should say, pitch and duration, we're always integral as a unit, then, you know, I can just, this is what I mean by habits. This is what I meant by habits before. It's just, if you think that these two things cannot be separated, then all your speculations on, like, pitch modulation and durational modulation are going to, like, treat them as inseparable, which you know, it takes some kind of tweak to then separate them. And in relation to this is like, so now separate thing. In relation to what Tony was mentioning, I think a similar break was necessary, where this kind of, like, where the difference in intensity in visual information was then mapped into a different field, a different perceptual modality, which to me actually highlights the fact that you can't really just have audition separate from the rest of the sensory modes. You know, there's plenty of cross-modal illusions. You know, like there's one that I really like, which, if you have a video of someone saying ba ba ba, and then you swap out the audio of ba with the audio for fa, you actually start seeing the lips of the speaker change. I mean, you can look it up on YouTube. It's called the McGurk effect. But when you see it, it's totally wild. But you know, sorry, go ahead.
There's one other aspect of alien sounds that I would like to address, which is the sound of the data, the sound of big data, and the sound of those dimensions of massive exchanges of information. The sound of that, and Ryoji Ikeda has been working with that. For me, that's a new kind of aesthetics. It's alien. It's alien in many ways. And when you have a person like Amy, for example, because Amy could be here right now. She actually should come. You know, she's in the. Come on, Amy. Come on, please. Because yeah, she's in the other panel, but she belongs here anyway. Because a person like Amy, for example, when the kind of work that she does, right, when she takes a sound and transforms the sound into a 3D model, that's for me, that for me is the Xenopoetics, which is, it's alien, and it's alien sound and vision and mediation and everything at the same time, right? So maybe she can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can mention it quickly. I work at the moment in a process where something that I'm trying to call Xenopoetics, which involves writing a text poem, usually something that interrogates the idea of abstraction in poetic history, then rewriting it in phonemes, completely empty of all punctuation and any other kind of marking, apart from sound marking. And then I've got a synesthetic alphabet that I've created that then will map each one of those phonemes onto a three-dimensional shape, which is being built in a CAD program. And then I thread those shapes, phonemes, together along a line which is infinite. It connects to itself across the surface of a sphere. And then I'll 3D print these kind of fist-sized objects with the poem encoded materially, sonically, and textually in it. And you can read them, you can find the original poem if you line, or if you sound it out experimentally enough. poems will have homophones in them, so you can't properly decode it. You can just throw it at people if you want it. You want to write your political message in it and take it to the streets and throw it through a couple of people's windows. You can do that. But the thing that I'm really experimenting with that is the idea that there is always a relationship, a kind of cybernetic relationship between matter and abstraction. And in a way, the comment that Lendl made earlier about the alien always being defined in relation to whatever normative framework you have speaks to this, because it's about finding the thing that is on the outside of that, figuring out how to hold it in, coming up with a new construction, and then finding the next outside to that, and pulling art along through this particular vectoral operation of always having to respond to this alien outside.
Is that close to being finished? Or?
It's a work in progress. I've got a bunch of them done, yeah.
I'd see them and throw them.
Throw some at you.
Yay!
Sometime in the future, maybe.
What sort of poetry? Mind me asking?
They're all short poems because they become quite bulky, obviously, very quickly. They play a lot with sound. Like I said, they all involve key homophones. So I try and write each text so that you can read it. You just have the sound. You're trying to write down what you're hearing. You have around 8 different ways you can write it, including like the end of one word running onto the start of another word. So you can have kind of the noise between the beginning of one word and the start of another word to become a new word.
What exactly do you say? You don't have to. It's all right. Are they personal poems? Or?
No, not at all. They're just hard to remember because they're quite repetitive. So there's one based on Stefan Mallarmé's Crisis of Verse in Divagations, where he talks about, I can't remember the line anymore, but talks about when I say a flower, the pure notion bereft of any known bloom appears before me, or something like that. This idea of abstraction kind of access to poetic truth, and sound and music being very heavily involved in that. So I take the word calyx, which is in the original French version, which is your kind of like petals on a flower. And the poem that I kind of wrote out of that was impassive calyx is impassive calyx is. So there's a kind of play going on if you actually sit and write that down, where I've encoded the plural final syllable of calyx is, so it has the same phoneme as is, the copula, and you get a kind of play between whether, depending on how many is's you read into it, whether the is starts to kind of question its isness, whether the calyx is plural or singular, so you get a kind of play between like the one and the multiple. So the point is, kind of spoiled it, telling you the poem, but no, it's fine. But you can't get back to that original poem. You don't know how to read it, and it's constantly out from under whatever sort of pattern of sound you attribute to it.
Thank you so much. And yeah, so we have to move on now. And thank you so much. So now we move on to the Alien Mediations panel. So what are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about radical novelty. Radical novelty is unrecognizable and therefore always alien. We're going to have a conversation about emergent patterns and radically new mediation. So I invite Jondi Keane. I invite Erick Felinto, who is here, and Leon, you don't go anywhere because you represent TED. Yeah, okay. So I'm really happy to have Erick Felinto here. Let me see if I can get Erick Felinto on the.
Yes, I'll put him on 1 second.
Hold on.
He should be on now, right?
this is Erick Felinto. Erick Felinto is a media theorist from Brazil, from my home country, and one of the few people that actually engages and responds to the kind of research that I do in Brazil. And he is an amazing theorist, and he specializes in something that he doesn't like us to call it like that. German media theory, that doesn't even exist, right? But you gotta call it something. So whatever that is, let's call it German media theory. So one of the most knowledgeable scholars on German media theory is Erick. And Erick is a very interesting person because he is an alien, okay? He can actually tell you a little more about that, but he is an alien. And I think I want Erick to be the first speaker on the panel. So, can you tell us a little bit about alien mediation, Erick? What is alien mediation for you, from your perspective?
1 second, Erick, you're muted. So, let me... Okay, try to speak now.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Renata, for inviting me. I'm sorry for the way I look, but it's like 5 a.m. here. This whole experience is a bit alien for me. This is the first time that I have to speak in English using this kind of mediation. But it was really interesting when you invited me for this hangout, because I have been interested in the question of the alien for some time now. And it's an interesting coincidence that I have been reading so many books, so many works, not only of fiction, but also philosophy and theory, that use the theme, the topic of the alien, especially in the past 20 years. So for me, alien mediation has a lot to do with trying to find a new way of thinking that goes beyond the human. And I really believe that in the last 20 years or so, there's been several really interesting works of theory and philosophy that deal with the topic of the alien as a way to develop a new kind of thinking that tries to go beyond the human. And I think the only way to do this is by means of fiction. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but in the last weeks, I saw this on Facebook. Scientists are now saying that the octopus, the squid, has a very strange kind of DNA, and they find it really difficult to find any kind of relationship between the DNA of the octopus and other beings on this planet. And this is really an interesting coincidence, because one of the authors that have been interesting me in the past few years, it has a lot to do with what Renata calls German media theory. Willem Flusser, this philosopher who lived in Brazil for more than 30 years, he wrote this fascinating book called Vampiroctoides Infernalis, where he imagines the encounter of this very strange alien creature, which is precisely an octopus. And he uses the theme, the topic of the character of the octopus to produce a very interesting reflection on human nature. And Flusser was probably the first guy to develop this idea, this concept, which he called philosophical fiction, which was a way of combining philosophy, theory, and fiction with the goal to achieve a new form of thinking that tries to become, I would say, post-human. It tries to go beyond the human. And recently, I read this book by this very interesting French philosopher, Petra Kendall. It's called, perhaps you heard about it, it's called Kant Among the Extraterrestrials. And it's a very interesting way of a very interesting work of philosophy, where Petra Kendall proposes to develop a philosophy of the alien. And he even maps out the presence of the alien in the history of philosophy. He shows that, for instance, in the 18th century, several philosophers were really interested in the topic, in the theme of the alien. like Kant, for instance. Kant uses the fiction of the alien in order to try to understand the essence of human being. Because the only way for Kant to develop a philosophy of the human, to try to understand the essence of the human, was to work the fiction of another intelligent being. Since there's no, apparently there's no other intelligent being on this planet, he had to use the fiction of the alien in order to have a term of comparison between the human being and something else that we can use as a measure to understand human essence. And Beta Zendi calls the strategy of using a fiction, using imagination with philosophy, he calls the strategy philosophiction. It's a very interesting coincidence because I don't think Beta Zendi had read Flusser before. But
that's fascinating.
Similar, the concepts
That
are very
makes me even more interested in Flusser, actually.
Yes, Flusser is a fascinating figure, and I really believe that Flusser anticipated several trends of contemporary thought. Because Vampirotoides Infernalis, for instance, was written with biological artist Lee Beck in 1991. And for me, it's one of the most interesting books that deals with the topic of posthumanism in a time when posthumanism was just beginning to develop. Yeah. Sorry, hold on for a second.
So I'm gonna ask Jondi now what he thinks about all these things, because I'm sure that his perspective is very, very interesting. So, Erick, this is Jondi. Can you see him?
Hello.
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. How are you? I hope you guys can understand me through my thick accent.
It's perfect.
The horror. The horror. Foucault, the horror. I guess I'm wondering if the alien isn't just another way of romanticizing and domesticating the unknown. And, you know, this kind of impulse has always been around. I mean, Wittgenstein talked about we make a mythology of our own symbolism. I'm wondering if it's just not the newest trend in a tendency that's kind of always been around. I'm to some extent interested more in how we practice this sort of movement between the way that we set up these sharp and fuzzy distinctions between things. So I'm more interested in the way that things share events but not extent. So for example, if you think about a person as a construct of behaviors that an organism evolves or constructs, and that an organism might construct a person in order to tentatively hold something in place. So you can remember when you're younger, the first time you had an intense conversation, and there was almost like a shape that you were constructing with someone else, and you could inflect that shape by the way that you talked to each other and how it moved, and it had a life of its own, and it dissipated. And I'm wondering that if in fact, if we truly start to think of the person as separate from the organism but has a relationship with it, the organism has a greater extent than the person does. So Victoria Vesna talks about how we actually do have a memory of being a single-celled organism. That Fedorov talks about how everything that we touch in the world is actually made of the atoms of our ancestors. In fact, we do have a connection to these things that we want to call alien, and we domesticate them in a way that provides meaning for ourselves and makes us feel good and gives us the new way to construct our way through the world that we don't really know how to do. It allows us to, you know, my partner was supposed to be on the panel here next to me tonight with whom I've taken the vows of hyper-objecthood with, but she couldn't be here. And, you know, and we have you know, we withdraw into the flat ontology of I'm an autonomous object for me, but then it's also, sometimes also it's good to not be an autonomous object and to enter into a kind of a co-creative, co-selective system that extends outside ourselves. And for me, OOO kind of is the animal form of objects. You know, all objects are equal, but some objects are more equal than others. So we need to get away from this kind of, oh yeah, I can tell you the new description of the world, but really what does that help us do? We need practices for moving between events and extents. We need practices for getting to the single cell organism in ourself that shares the continuity with the atoms of our ancestors. We need the practices that allow us to understand that I've misunderstood everything you've ever said because I thought you were talking about us instead of an insipid homonym of us. So we need these kind of practices that get away from just dividing up the world into the distinction that we re-enter in order to make ourselves feel good because we've domesticated the unknown. We need the practice that allows us to feel little fishes that were there in time immemorial, that swim through us, that extend out into the world. And I think this is the speculative pragmatism rather than a speculative realism, because the real doesn't really have any place here. The pretty doesn't have any place here. It's only what moves us to the next set of fictions that helps us throw out the fly fishing rod and pull it back into us to make something happen. And you're only holding it together for a moment of time, and then it dissipates. It's about persistence and change. It's not about this kind of thing of us and other, the distinction and the reconciliation. It's not that kind of stuff. I'll stop now.
Wow. That was gold. Yeah. Wow. Leon, I think you should come. We have a story for you here, a story of resilience. Okay? Ted Colless, who is a person that I admire deeply for the originality and quality of the work that he does. And he was supposed to be here today with us, but he's in the hospital right now. He had a heart problem. But from his hospital...
He has a heart.
He has a heart. A big one. A very big one. And he wrote a text from the hospital bed. He did.
Oh, shit. Sorry, Ted.
Wants us to hear tonight. He wrote a text just for us, and he asked that Leon read the text. So I'm looking forward to it because it's probably going to be like a smasher on our heads, which is usually what he does to people. So let's listen to Ted Colless in the words of Leon right now.
All right. Ted sent this to me just few hours ago. It's gone through a couple of iterations according to himself, and as Renata said, Ted sorely wishes that he was here, but Ted is sore. He's had 2 operations in the past 2 weeks, but despite that, he's managed to produce this text. Now, this is the first time I've read it, so please bear with me. Ted says, I know it sounds perverse, but for a moment, let's speculate on alien aesthetics becoming an academic subject. Undoubtedly a hip one, but also credentialized. One branch of its research profile would surely have to be xenomorphology, from the Greek xenon, a practical area of iconological investigation charting comparative ethnographic, physiognomic, and physiological details of foreign bodies, or xenomorphs, such as the pointed ears of pixies or Vulcans and the pointed teeth of vampires, the wings and genitalia, or substitute for sexual organs, of angels and gargoyles, the almond eyes and attenuated limbs of extraterrestrials, and the skin complexions of the undead. It might stretch to include the behavioral vocal textures and inflections, in addition to mannerisms and the graphic user interfaces of androids or personalized onboard computer operating systems. Rather than being akin to an exposition of stories of divine metamorphosis, such as Ovid's epic poem, the endeavor of such a xenomorphology would be comparable to the inventories in wonder books and travelers' tales from antiquity to the early modern era that catalogue the marvelous and monstrous inhabitants or landscapes of distant and strange places. Catalogues which were usually palimpsests of previously authorized texts, and thus, in classical terms, academically verifiable. Perhaps the most intriguing as well as radical candidate for the xenomorph would be the eponymous creature in John Carpenter's 1984 remake of Howard Hawks' science fiction film The Thing. The sponge-like, borderless pseudo-body with no containing skin, no proper internal organs, no digestion, and thus no inner organization. An unnameable contaminant that is nothing but the lumpy, cartilaginous synthesis, a melange of whatever it indiscriminately touches, copulates with, and thus incorporates, and the ingredients of which break out like sunspots throughout its fuming and coagulating biomass. The brilliant simulacrum of a creature, this thing even offers itself up for forensic pathology on a dissecting table in a horrifying mockery of an autopsy. For, like the real blood-borne virus contagion it was partly modelled upon, it cannot really die, as it does not really live. Or, as the medical authority on astrobiology in Star Trek puts it, it's life, but not as we know it, Jim. Of course, the agenda of xenomorphology couldn't be limited to mythological or fantastical or speculative, allegorical species, but would have to incorporate discernible features of the real social, cultural aliens generated and subjugated by our own political economy and cultural imperialism. In our time, this would necessarily entail accounting for heterotopic, post-colonial, allegedly borderless but increasingly stateless and extra-legal transients, asylum seekers and economic refugees, the precariat of an unplaced workforce of boat people and street people, clandestine suicide bombers, and even biocapital entities, genetically engineered species, clones, cyborgs, and web avatars, drone targets, internet viruses, and stock market algorithms. The scope and the discipline of such a venture would be encyclopedic and relentlessly inclusive. But exactly here, a problem emerges with the discursive fluency of this iconographic thesaurus. By definition, the alien eludes welcoming, collection, accommodation, familiarization, and accountability. To be indeed alien, foreign bodies are not only not from here, they do not belong anywhere. Ipso facto, they are not just displaced, but unplaced. They have neither the generality of species nor the particularity of a specimen. They have neither the provenance of an exodus nor the pedigree of a genesis. This is not just a matter of semantics. In his summary of a decade's copious investigation into the phenomenology of the alien, Bernhard Waldenfels states that a xenology, or cultural study of the alien, would ironically have to be a logon, outside the logos, irreducibly inaccessible, and we might add, bloody hell, I hope this is the right order. And we might add, would be, yes, it does follow, doesn't it? Would be what the Pythagoreans, hail Pythagoras, already mentioned, called non-in ratio, or incommensurable and unaccountable, out of order. The Alogon is a wilderness, but not a place for eco-tourists. Rather a dead zone of exiles. In the same way, says Waldenfels, a Xenopoetics will paradoxically be apolitical. It is like that empty proposition within the polis, characterized by the estranged Socrates who, Waldenfels alleges, lived in the city but is atopos, acts as a living question mark. As a praxis of a radically questionable entity, Xenopoetics resists any totalization and breaks open every inclusion. Infiltrated and contaminated by Xenopoetics, the political world order, Waldenfels declares, would remain porous. It's a great name, isn't it? Waldenfels. I like that. Xenology would similarly corrode and eat away from within the order of the cosmos. We might repurpose this formula and suggest that a xenoaesthetics would be feral, but also sickening, unstable. The art of appearances would be contaminated with a leprous porosity rather than displaced as a beguiling simulacrum. I'd like to use my talk tonight, TED Talk, as an opportunity to venture into such a porous zone. I take as my guide H.P. Lovecraft's thought of this, of course, the mention of the octopus and its alien DNA, of course. All hail Cthulhu. Take as my guide H.P. Lovecraft's fictional mad Arab Abdul al-Azred, who after years of exiled itinerancy amongst the jinn and the demons of the desert, composed the accursed grimoire, the Necronomicon. In his short story, The Festival, Lovecraft quotes his own fictional magus. The nethermost caverns, wrote the mad Arab, are not for the fathoming of eyes that see, for their marvels are strange and terrific. Cursed the ground where dead thoughts live near and oddly bodied, and evil the mind that is held by no head. For it is of old rumour that that soul of the devil-bought hastes not from his charnel clay, but fats? I'm sure that's not right. That must be a typo on Ted's part. But something, and instructs the very worm that gnaws, till out of corruption horrid life springs, and the dull scavengers of earth wax crafty to vex it, and swell monstrous to plague it. Great holes are secretly digged, where earth's pores ought to suffice, and things have learned to walk that ought to crawl. Yeah. All right. I know it's a lot more. Shall I edit it? No. I'll keep going.
Start doubling up.
Yeah. Those black depths of earth.
No one will dare to interrupt my
against
pleasure.
are the infected wounds from which hatch our acephalic horrors, hatching as unborn and undead maggoty infestations of the womb. Do we not usually conceive this horrid life form as an invasive agency, as a plaguey contamination? Did you get that plaguey? That's
no,
a good one.
plaguey.
The plaguey contamination of a host body. Like the interloper and seducer worm and the bud that makes the rose sicken, in William Blake's epic analogy for tainted love. An interloper worm that flies in the night as the masked freight of a serpentine disease, seeking out its host with a howling storm of passion. This horrible invader and conqueror worm. You got that one? Yeah, I know. Okay, this horrible invader
I told you.
and conqueror worm is what Greek medicine identified as a pathogen called pharmacon. The stimulant, the stimulant, the drug, the aggressive foreign body that invades, subdues, supplants, and harms the condition it cures. Therapeutic and injurious, enhancing and contaminating, despised, but begged for.
I didn't get that.
Taken as well as consuming. Is a poisonous vitality which, at the extremity of its incursion, affiliated with a technique of catharsis and the diagnostic recognition of pathos as suffering or affliction, becomes the excitation of feeling, becomes an inflammatory affection.
Atoms of excitement.
Where did you get the atoms from? Quiet, yes. Ted, we're still going.
This life is a worm corrupting from the host as its own devouring parasite. For this worm is nothing but a mouth, or at least a mouth, alimentary tract, and anus, as one modulating organ, agency of an absolute hunger and excretion. Its animation, that is to say, its weird life, not exactly displaying the characteristics of vitalism, consists entirely and purely in its blind intestinal peristaltic pulsing motion of pushing its way through soil, earth, flesh, the valves of the heart, curds or blood, and this motion proceeds by the organ eating its way forever into granular matter or fibrous tissue or viscous fluid, ingesting and defecating in a pulse without diversion, a palpitation that is nothing else than an unmodulated imperative continuously being expressed until exhaustion. Is this an exercise distillable to techne alone, whose purpose is nothing but the action in itself? If so, its functionality is modest, but nonetheless can be redeemable within a greater ecological scheme for aerating the ground soil or decomposing the flesh. In such a chain of being, soil or flesh or blood is where the worm belongs. The soil, blood, or flesh provides it with its ethnicity, its specific medium or element, territoriality, its proper place. There is nothing alien about such a worm. It is the shy but useful tenant of a grandly intelligent design. But in this very comfortable, cosmopolitan, patronizing welcome of the lowliest of the low into the order of the cosmos, something other than the relation between worm and soil, blood, flesh is turned. Thus, this ingestion converts into anything else than the attenuated pathways of its own organic function. Is there anything wasted in this motion, anything ejected and left behind, or anything stored? At least, in the graphic diagram of its cosmological functions, in its aesthetic modeling, the very lack of excess in consumption has an unsettling mode of pure organization. And this is its unique yet ambiguous monstrosity. It is all head and behind.
There's 2 more pages. All ahead of itself and all left behind itself and in itself. The worm does not travel, not, that's to say, from an origin to a destination. It merely moves, and in doing so removes what is ahead and to what is left after. Matter and movement are diagrammatically disposed as graph functions in the worm's essence, its worming. At the same time, it is neither ahead nor behind, since its organic and mobile differentiations collapse into the hideous disorganization of effacement, disfiguration, decapitation, and disoriented deformity. All head, but it's headless or acephalitic, all anus, but like the human centipede, all alimentary shivering and quaking reverberation from its gaping mouth. Thus, contrary to any right ecological piety or consolation by which we diminish the horror and place the worm topographically as the element of creation within the system instrumentally for decomposing and renewing matter in its life cycle, systemic to life's vital becoming and vibrancy, much like the way we might treat the fly's maggot or the wasp's parasitical spawn in their spermatic journey within and through and out of the host's body, and which requires of us an ethical supplication to the necessity of this cyclical process, as well as the aesthetic supplication to it by affirmation and entitlement. Contrary then to this Attenborough-like redeeming identification of organicity and utility in, I'm getting tired. Yes, in Campos, we ought not to think of the worm in normal terms any more than we ought to bestow it with purposive predatory action. It exists neither as a noun nor a verb, neither as being nor becoming. We can even consider it as the desublimation of appetite or the expulsion of taste. Thus we no more can justify the word, worm, as the noun to specify its essence than we can use the term worming to indicate its becoming. In fact, symptomatic of the repression of this ontological as well as grammatical horror, we resort to the pharmacon of worming to denote being purged of worms rather than being riddled with them. We worm a pet or livestock as a mode of routine maintenance and rid them of these things that are considered ruinously supplemental and parasitic. Our worming is the anecdote for the very thing it describes, a condition no longer veriform or vermiculate. The turning worm hidden inside the disavowal is not even a thing.
In a dazzlingly obscure essay, Worm Sign, Nicola Masciandaro describes the ontological and ethical exclusion of worms, and by inference, their Lovecraftian horrific crypto-ontological manifestation. By accounting for them as pure prepositionality, an agency of non-dynamic relations such as before, after, on, in, or for. Although these all occur in a slur or slurry of muck at once within the worm's animated existence. The worm is placed in relation to its host, but outside of and not assimilated within any noun or verb form it can be identified with. Thus the placatory deep ecological sentiment for complexifying all life within the unbounded composite assimilation of the one. A sort of ecological actor network regardless of the consuming violence of the network's relations. This is ironically much like John Carpenter's vision of the alien thing. In that movie, the metamorphosis of the thing, in its relentless renewed reproduction of itself, is primordial and boundless. But even as its portions hive off or are cremated on funeral pyres, the humans under siege must remind themselves that the thing ultimately counts as one rather than many, and the tiniest survival in a glob of blood is as lethally infectious as a room-sized snarling hydra. The element in which the thing travels is in fact all other things. Its medium is the cosmos, owned in the same way as those predatory interstellar species that move like locusts throughout galaxies, devouring planet after planet. They are at home anywhere and everywhere. The thing is a caricature of cosmopolitan taste, able to enjoy everything the world provides, no matter how far on the diet the cultural fare or currency might be. A galloping gourmet, stranger to nowhere. And this cosmopolitan appetite is both emblematized and desecrated by the worm. Emblematized because all nature at its source and its end is trivially worm feed. But desecrated because that agency of wormy matter and motion, eating and shitting, this nature is a dark exclusion of creation. The worm conquers all. In Edgar Allan Poe's celebrated Gothic imagery, and in the imagery of the conqueror worm's medieval predecessors of worm-infested corpses. But its conquest is purposeless and unedifying. It is the master of nothing apart from its own fecalizing and fallopian medium, which it blindly engorges and disgorges. Cosmos is an unnameable secretion. The worm is unbeing and unbecoming. It unmakes creation, not by generating the compost which, with a pedigree of Aristotelian animism, is essential to the vitality of life, but by desecrating and perverting conception to spawn a devitalized, horrid life. The worm's host, its ground, its origin and destination, might be the enriching soil of the earth, or an animal's bloodstream, or the furls of an intestinal tract, or the infected, suppurating fat of a subcutaneous lesion. But the worm's enrichment of that soil, bloodstream or pussy tissue, is cryptogenic. Its origin and destination, its entitlement and ethos, so to speak, are extraneous to the topos it defines, and so it doesn't count. Worms infest, open up in chaotic porosity that the host and of the host, and seemingly emerge from nothing. They are the openings of nothing, atopos. Worm space, as Reza Negrestani calls it in his geopolitical epileptic grimoire, Cyclonopedia, is the vermiculating putrescence of the philosophical and aesthetic thing, as its innermost unnatural monstrosities erupt into the surface space of our naturalized biosphere. The body, animal, human, but also the body of the earth as corpse, and moreover the corpse of the sun, dissolve in a swarm of glutinous, coiling and obscurely creeping porosity. In the late medieval and early modern period in Europe, worms were considered, like weevils, to be products of spontaneous generation. Bloody Nora. I can do it! Asexual and erupting from within certain kinds of matter, such as soil, flesh, or in a most famous case, from cheese. Carlo Ginzburg's celebrated book, The Cheese and the Worms, from 1976, describes the intricate structure of a cosmology espoused by Mendocino, a miller from the village of Montreal Vallecina in the Italian Alps, who was tried by the Italian Inquisition and eventually burnt at the stake in 1599. All was chaos, Mendocino declared in his trial. That is, earth, air, water, fire were mixed together, and worms appeared in it, and then there were angels. Just as cheese is made out of milk, so the cosmos was made out of the elements in an undifferentiated bulk, but one prone to infestations, to clotting, and to spreading vermiculate porosity. Worms will appear in the cheese as the mark of its maturing. Angels, which included the army or rebels later to be given the names of demons and devils, appeared spontaneously in this primordial sylvan soup of the four elements, appearing in the same moment and substance as the admixture of elements, erupting, in other words, as insurgent impurities or secondary amalgams. The angels were the erupting heterogeneities of cosmos. And the angels included God as their captain, and so he was made in the maturing decomposition of the cosmos, in the rotting of the cheese. God was a worm in the cheese. Although self-evidently discourteous to the Inquisitor's God, and thus careening into blasphemy, this analogy was not strictly speaking all that heretical. Scotus Erigena, although condemned later as a heretic himself, comments on the line from Psalm 22, Ego sum vermes et non homo, for I am a worm and not a human, inducing the analogy that while nothing is more lowly than the worms, conceived as they are from within the bowels of simple earth nevertheless, and this is a brilliantly beautiful desecration, nevertheless the incarnation itself, that miracle of matter and spirit so central to Christian doctrine, is represented in this inexplicable, spontaneous, meaning willful, not random or adventitious, begetting of the worm. And no less an authority than St. Augustine was answering his musing on why the psalmist of 22:6 would induce such pessimism, bordering on the sin of despair. Augustine offers the most sophistic retort that, quote, a worm is born from flesh without intercourse, as Christ was born from the Virgin Mary. But as a worm penetrates the bowels of the earth, I, a human, penetrate the hidden things of creation. This is an ecological piety, if there ever was one, and no less pious in its way than the effusion of Nietzsche's Zarathustrian admonition, quote from Nietzsche, I beseech you, my brothers, remain faithful to the earth. After all, it is a sacrilege to dishonor it, and in Zarathustra's warning is the ecological imperative for de-romanticizing the folly of the world, by earthing it, bringing its pomposity and avarice and gluttony and lusts and rage, in short, bringing its sins down to earth, and into the earth, into the grave and its compost, in order to dispel and purge the world to so redeem it. Does not the Nietzschean overman reside in a similar doctrinal ecology? Is that as that of the incarnation? Is not the Übermensch the truth and fidelity to the earth that is emblematized in the spontaneous generation testified to by angelic annunciation as a performative embodiment of the will? We could say that the spontaneous performativity of the will is both these Christian and anti-Christian doctrines, is an inseminating, enunciative act. But the patristic commentary on the psalmist's cosmic pessimism is itself a wormifying desecration of the miracle it honors, and so too is the Übermensch. The singularity of this overcoming, a sublime willfulness of growth and vitalism and animism, forges the one in which there is nothing of the herd or swarm or tribe, the one above any commonality or commons, not a Luciferian negation of God, but that which is remote, alien from all creation, excluded. In pondering such a non-topography or atopos of identification with the divine, the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart records, were I to find myself for a single instant in this essence, I would have as little regard for myself as I would for the dung worm. The human may have its etymology in the wormy stuff of earth, the humus, the soil turned over and enriched by its wormification. But the chthonic myths of primordial clay that speak to a spontaneous generation of life only earth us by giving us the leprous face of an erupting porosity, an abysmal opening in the morbid embrace of a decaying sun, a rotten sun that Bataille says invokes not spiritual elevation, but mental ejaculation, foam on the lips, and an epileptic crisis. The host of earth opens its hell mouth like a sandworm digesting the world's inhabitants over thousands of years. to think of ourselves as compost of our life and death as the organization and reorganization of matter and energy in differential stages may be the most pernicious consolation of an ecological perspective. The earth that supplies such a deceit should not be honoured but dishonoured, loathed and hated even more than the God that created it. We are cadavers, not compost, in the medieval etymological emblem of a caro data vermibus, that is, flesh given over to worms. Any resistance to this fate can only be an acceleration of it. Let all the diseases in the mud hatch out, said Emperor Claudius, commencing his memoir as he reflected on the corruption of Roman life. Our individuating disease is not the topos coagulating with a systematic regulation of a greater integral power to which we ought piously be supplicant. Just as life is not an oasis of negentropy, just as death is not simply the entropic dissipation of information. Consider instead the alien aesthesia of the worm, unearthed, ungrounded, unassimilated. Contrary to John Carpenter's The Thing as an undead creature, emblematic of virulent contagion and plague, ready to consume the world, if we could find a word for the strangeness of the worm, we might grope towards a distressed adjective that cannot support any noun, a descriptor that when we utter it sounds amputated, acephalic, a headless corpse squirming. It is the unthinged. And that's the end. All right, now, Ted wrote that after 2 operations on his huge ticking heart. There you go again. Thank you, Ted.
Wow.
After that assault, I'm not sure what we can say. Where's my perno? I think that may be...
We must contemplate the meaning and open the silence to the next expression, right? That's the way we do it. So let's just open it a little bit, take it all in a little bit, because he's definitely pointing towards something there. It's not easy to understand, but it's definitely alien.
I will say this, that having read that, reading that out, Ted is here with us.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Ted is definitely here with us.
Definitely.
There's a heavy Ted
question
presence.
about it. But I think if you see the movie Centipede, you'll understand this quite well. I was thinking that the film, the 2 different versions of The Thing, one is where the alien comes into a human community that's constantly chattering. If you notice in the first film, there are people talking over each other. The dialogue is really fast and it's continuous. And in the John Carpenter film, there's almost no dialogue at all. It's almost silent. So the alien actually comes into a world of alien phenomenology where all the humans have retreated into themselves and have nothing more to say.
So when that happens, maybe we should ask the machine. What does the machine have to say? The next panel. No, but maybe I think that Erick might want to say something. You want to say something about a reaction to the text, Erick?
Hi. Yes, maybe just a final word on something that was said before about the nature of thought. Because I believe that not only our mind, of course, can produce thought, but also our bodies. And that's something interesting that we can find also in Flusser's work. Because he talks about how we can change our bodies in the way that we create works of art by means of genetic manipulation. He wrote that in the 80s. He was talking about genetic manipulation of our bodies in the 80s. He wanted to suggest that we can only create new forms of thought if we are able to change our bodies and create new kinds of configurations, new material configurations. So for me, he was a thinker that saw very clearly the connection between reality and thought. And that's something that we need nowadays, because for the last 2,000 years, what we have been doing in the humanities is to create interpretation, to interpret text, and we have never investigated the role of thought and materiality in the creation of concepts. For me, that's something very interesting that's going on nowadays, and for me, that has a lot to do with the idea of an alien thinking or alien mediations, the importance of materiality in the creation of thought and the new.
Right. Wow. Okay. Anyone would like to say anything from the news center, maybe before we close the panel? You want to say something, Jason?
Not right now, though.
The one thing I think that we were talking about here was if we could get that paper shared with us at some point. Is that available?
That's Tony's.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
available.
Okay.
Shall we? We can send a PDF for you. No worries. We'll do that. All right. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion here. And now we proceed to the Xenofeminist panel, and it is my honor and pleasure to invite Deb Verhoeven, Amy Ireland, Petra, and Alison Bennett to join us here to talk about xenofeminism and gender fluidity. I think we just go and then we just party after. So, Deb Verhoeven, every time that I'm with her, I feel like she should chair. She should just chair everything. And that's what I'm going to do right now. No, but that's what I'm doing. Because I really can't chair anything that has Deb Verhoeven in it. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, she should chair it. So, I'll let Deb chair this panel. And let Deb control everything, because she's going to do a much better job than I can. So.
I really don't want to chair Renata, because then I don't get to speak. Because the chair has to be impartial.
Okay, she's not chairing, so she's speaking, but you know what I mean, okay? You understood what I mean, all right? So, Deb, please kick it.
Alrighty, well, as my friend Stuart in Twitter just described this session, Malian aesthetics, we've been presented with a plethora of blokes telling us what the future's going to look like. Not my future, and certainly not my present. And I guess, for me, this whole session has been very confronting. Even just thinking about what to say today has been pretty confronting. Partly, I think, because I'm, in general, wrapped up in what I'm going to call an existentialist moment, which is my crisis, and I'm not necessarily purporting that it's anyone else's. But for me, I'm kind of sitting here thinking, well, why am I here? And I want to know why you're here. Why are you guys in the audience at a panel mostly made up of women dealing with gender? Is it because you think we're going to talk about something you're not already convinced about? How many people think that women don't deserve gender equity in the audience? That's what I thought. So it's yet another kind of moment of preaching to the converted, where the women get to talk about their gender and the blokes get to talk about the future and get to talk about, you know, sound, vision, time, space, and I get to talk about my uterus or my genitalia or whatever else we attach to gender in the current moment. And I'm kind of unhappy about that. And it's part of a crisis that I'm having, as I keep saying. I don't want to kind of generalise too much beyond my own sense of where I am at the moment, but I spent 30 years being a subject specialist in digital culture, and instead of talking about that, I'm talking about gender. I'm not a gender studies specialist. I'm not someone who's written widely about gender. I happen to be a woman. I happen to be someone who's outspoken as a feminist, and that's why I'm here, I think. I'm not quite sure why I'm here. As I keep saying, it's my existentialist moment. What do we do about that? And I think in reflecting on where xenofeminism sits in relation to various different histories of feminism over the decades, I want to kind of make the point that although xenofeminism purports to be anti-naturalist, and I don't disagree with any of that. I think all good feminisms are anti-naturalistic to some extent. And I use the word good in inverted commas because I'm not meant to impose a moralism around good. But you can have a very sophisticated theory of the self. You can have an anti-naturalist theory of identity, but that doesn't stop power from going about its business. And power is what we don't have a theory of, and what we do need a theory of. And today, I have watched 10 out of 12 speakers be men, speaking about.
But that we had all the female speakers.
No,
the all female speakers, they are either sick or canceled in the very last moment. That's pretty much what happened.
The published program was 10 out of 12 men speakers prior to this panel, and this panel is all women. This is systemic. Okay, it's not personal. It's not about the programmers. This is what's accepted, that women get to speak on gender panels and not on other panels. Or if they do get to speak on other panels, they're the minor party on the other panels. No men were invited to speak on the gender panel, were they?
Bruce can come. He can come. He was the only male he was the only male to ask to be signed up in the cyber feminist mailing list, and it's my mistake because he should be here. You should come, Bruce. Come here. Come here. I've been wanting to hear what he has to say about xenofeminism for a long time, so it's my pleasure.
Okay, so I'm kind of pretty much said what I wanted to say, which is that I think that xenofeminism is an anti-naturalist variant of various different feminisms. It's probably something most of us in this room feel very comfortable with. I'm not convinced that without a theory of power, rather than a theory of gender, we're going to get very far. So that's all I wanted to say.
Should I respond? I think that's a really good point. And I've been involved over the last 2 nights in a bunch of workshops on Manifesto through Skype, where we've been deliberately throwing it open to comments and criticisms to figure out what needs to be done. It's not at all supposing to speak from a position of finality, or even, I mean, it's not for a totally complete theory of subjectivation, of power, of what should be done. It was kind of a way of laying out a bunch of kind of ideas of where to go from where we think we might be at the start of the 21st century in relation to the history. So, yeah, take that on board, and I think that's something that I'll bring up with the people who are involved in the workshops, which are still running. Lendl, who spoke earlier, is involved in them. I saw him speaking from space. I was talking to everyone out last night. The one thing I thought I'd add in there, because I agree as well that there is this kind of tendency to restrict women to speaking about gender and sexual politics in spaces where they're then not particularly, their voices aren't considered to be particularly important on other subjects. Which, I mean, it's just another reiteration of this unmarked, masculine, generic, sort of parading as some kind of neutral position. And the way we're trying to counter this, and it might seem counterintuitive, is this idea of the right to speak as no one in particular. The right to speak as someone who doesn't, I mean, to whom the fact that they have or do not have a uterus is not meaningful. So it's also one of the reasons why we're we're putting this forward as a trans feminism and involving a lot of trans politics in it. It is fraught because as soon as you try and posit an idea of reason as neutral, there's a whole history of feminism fought staunchly against reason as a totality because of the way it has been occupied by male subjectivity, especially in Western history. And what's the other thing I was going to say? We want to reclaim that space, basically. We want to reclaim it as a space of neutrality. But we realize that you have to go through a feminist process to get there in order to take out all of the sedimented patriarchy. It's no good just to give up on reason as a space of enunciation that is occupied by the masculine, that is misled, that is oppressive in itself, and constrict our voices to some kind of material, natural, anti-rational, imaginative, intuitive space. I think these things need to be involved, but they need to be involved in a much more nuanced conceptual structure that involves reason as well. And I don't remember what else I was going to finish that up, but just before I pass it back over to you guys, I just thought I'd mention that we also have Petra Kendall, who has been involved in some of the workshopping of the manifesto in the hangout behind us, and a colleague of mine, Bailey Britz, who works in a lot of works in mathematics and the humanities, and a lot of these kind of areas that are thinking about the connection between aesthetics and domains that have been typically considered to be masculine. And we've had a lot of problems at our university, in our reading group, where we've been kind of told that we're reading masculine texts. We're reading math books.
That would be nice to hear some
So
stories about. Yeah.
If they want to jump in.
Yeah. Could you jump in, Bailey? Can we listen to Bailey?
I could. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Let's listen to Bailey.
I mean, it's a fascinating issue. I hope you can hear me. I've got massive interference, but I'm just getting used to it. I think that the disconnect between theory and politics, which is something that I think you brought up at the start as you were introducing it, is a massive problem. But what we're attempting to do, or what I think xenofeminism is attempting to do, is to apply new theories of rationalism to feminism, right? So it's an attempt to bring theoretical innovation, right, into feminist questions. And of course, I think I agree with Amy in the sense that it's the start of a process, right? And it's the start of trying to develop a new theoretical articulation of politics. It's not something, and Amy will correct me if I'm wrong, it's not something that started necessarily from a political movement, but it started from an academic and artistic sphere, right? With people trying to articulate practices that we have in the humanities and that we've been dealing with in places like aesthetics after finitude for a long time, explicitly rather than implicitly into the realm of feminism. And there's a huge opposition to that in terms of the alliance between reason and feminism, and in terms of the alliance between things like mathematics, which are not normally used towards theoretical political ends, for feminism. I think xenofeminism does that in an exciting way. But I'd be interested to hear what Petra has to say about that too.
Yeah. You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Something that was pointed out by, unfortunately, I can't remember who at the workshop on Saturday, was that there are a couple of valences to the prefix Xeno, and I think that has a it's really important to kind of play with those and use them interchangeably. And the ones that I find interesting are that it's not only Xeno is not only the alien or the outside, but it also implies being a host of a guest, and that's very interesting because it it's, how do I put this, like a feminism inside the alien, and yeah, I don't know, about finding. Amy used this language that I found really interesting, which is about how you know, maybe fetishizing the alien only leads to something a little bit confusing, which is that like you end up integrating that and it's no longer alien. And so Amy pointed out that, you know, part of it as a project is to find what is alien within, right, but not yet understood or perceived as or recognized as outside and within. And I love that, you know, we're talking about worms earlier, and now we're talking about xenofeminism, which is almost like a parasite inside of feminism. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, I'd just like to add to that. I think it's a really brilliant point, and I think that one of the potential problems, and this is an old theoretical problem as well, right? It's not a new one. Is the idea of how one articulates an outside without reintegrating it into a normative or fetishized place. And I think what's interesting about this is the alignment of this philosophy with older techniques of resistance, like trickster mentalities, like order exoticism, but also the legacy of mysticism, right? Which is an attempt to think that instance in terms of other domains, in terms of feminism, in terms of religion, in terms of post-colonialism, and so on. So I think there are these legacies of philosophies of the outside which could profitably be drawn on as well to support this project.
I don't know if I can hear them anymore.
Lost all moderation.
I'll take the chair now.
Yeah,
Alison,
okay.
Alison,
Right.
would you like to say something?
Okay. I'm going to speak from the point of view as an alien. And that is the subjective embodied position of someone on the autism spectrum who happens to be in a female body. And from that point of view, gender is...
Don't we all feel like that?
I know. From that point, well, that's a common response when you tell someone that you're coming from...
No, I mean, I don't wake up every morning and think, I'm in a female body.
Yeah,
right?
Society tells you that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I still feel bemused and confused by that every day.
And I think that is more common than people will speak about.
Yeah. My reading of xenofeminism is the politics of the outsider. Yeah. And that's certainly one of the ways in which subjective autism experience is explained. It's a bit like finding yourself on an alien planet and trying to make sense.
Can you speak a little bit more in the microphone?
I'll try. What I said was it's a little bit like, it's often described as being finding yourself on an alien planet and trying to make sense without anyone actually picking up that you actually don't belong. Yeah. So something really interesting that's happening in autism self-advocacy is aligning itself with queer politics and the way that queer politics has made sense of the movement from shame and trying to be in the closet and to pass without people noticing that you're actually the other, to that process of moving through to pride and to not to try and hide it. So part of what I'm dealing with at the moment is the feedback and electronic noise in the background is actually incredibly overwhelming for me. So if I sort of lose my train of thought, it's because I'm actually having trouble dealing with that. Yeah. So one of the reasons that I practice photography is as a method for making sense of an alien planet.
I guess the point I'm trying to raise is that we can adopt the approach that our positions are other or alien, or we can adopt the approach that we've been disempowered.
Totally.
And that, you know, there's a long tradition of avant-garde feminism that sits in the analysis of who speaks a different language, who speaks outside. Feminist film theory all through the 70s and into the 80s was pretty much dwelling on that problem. Do women make films differently? Do they speak differently? Are they outside mainstream discursive constructions of what's normative? Right? That's one whole very long-standing debate that's been going on for years within feminism. Then the other one is, well, do we focus on otherness as a binary, you're other or you're in, or do we sit down to talk about gradations of disempowerment? And that's, I think, where I've come to after 30 years of trying to make the world a better place and a more equitable place. I'm fucking over it because it's not.
Yeah.
It's worse. The position for women filmmakers in Australia is worse than it was in 1981, right? The position for women, generally speaking, in relation to wage equity is no better than it was when I started advocating on these issues years ago. You know, what has happened, right? It is actually profoundly depressing because it's not just about who gets to speak, although that's something I had focused on today. Mostly, we haven't got to speak around our expertise. We've got to speak around our gender, right? Problem number one, right? Number two is, how does that fulfill a profound sense of disempowerment for those of us who are in that position, okay? Problem number two. And they're not unrelated. Yeah. So for me, what I've sensed from what you're talking about is not just the sense of feeling alien or feeling othered, but what I want to do is take that into another place, which is how does that also make you feel disempowered?
Totally. Well, I guess that part of the autism self-advocacy movement is about reconstruing autism as from a disorder to a difference. And it's a difference which has strengths and weaknesses. It has weird difficulties and equally odd opportunities as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where we need to be, talking about that.
But what about gender fluidity, though? Because for me, that's like the most fascinating aspect of xenofeminism for me, you know? That's what is the xeno, really, the xeno in the feminism. It's the gender fluidity. And I would love to understand it better. You know, if you guys could, like, try to help me with that concept, I would be really grateful.
A lot of my practice involves working with people whose bodies are on the transgender spectrum. And transgender is a umbrella term that involves a whole spectrum of people who are what we could construe as being gender non-conforming or gender variant or gender rainbow of some kind, and it often involves people who traverse back and forth. When you're talking about people with uteruses, a number of the people that I deal with who present as and pass socially as male have uteruses, and they are very interesting reporters on that experience as well.
One of my trans friends always said that the only way to really understand gender is to be beyond it.
Yeah.
It's beautiful conception of the problem. But you know, there are only 2 countries in the world that recognise transgender people on passports. Okay, like this is what I'm talking about. So it's great to have a theory of gender fluidity. But the reality is, it doesn't exist except in 2 countries in the world. You know, when you fill out census information, what are the gender positions available to you?
Well, if there is an alternative, it's called other.
If there's an alternative.
Yeah.
I mean, Facebook actually has 30 categories for gender, which is lovely, but, you know, unusual.
Yeah, I was going to just mention that I've been working with some of the Australian cyberfeminists, our very own DNS Matrix, who, if you guys haven't heard of them, you should definitely look them up because they were absolutely...
DNS Matrix. I was quite the fan.
I'm sure that, yeah, they were moving in similar circles.
He has some stories.
Yeah. Well, they were very, very active, as, I mean, you guys might have been as well, on Lambda, which was one of the multi-user domains that were kind of very big at the first kind of decade of the internet. And I remember them sort of telling me how great the text-based internet was, because first of all, there was so much more space to present as whatever you wanted to present as. And when you logged into Lambda, you had 8 gender possibilities, and there were things like neutroid or a splat or stuff like that.
Yeah, but they're not dynamic. This is a really big problem. Most of the ontologies I deal with in designing digital platforms, which deal with existing archival ontologies, are incredibly limited in terms of the way they describe gender, and they number them. Male is number 1, female is number 2, and they're not even genders, they're biologies, right? But they purport to be genders. We've done a lot of work trying to get those ontologies to open up their categorizations at a really basic level with a lot of difficulty, okay? But even when you shift those things, they can't describe, well, I felt male for 3 years and then I felt female. And actually there's a bit of my life where I'm both, and because they're not temporally sensitive either, okay? They're fixed. So how do you do this? How do you open up ontologies? And some of the experimental work we've been doing with things like Honey, the Humanities Networked Infrastructure, is enabling people to use vernacular ontologies to describe relationships. Okay, these are really significant and radical interventions, but you know, these are minor moments. This is what I could be speaking about if I weren't sitting on the gender panel, because they're not just about gender. They're about how we actually describe the world we live in dynamically. How do we describe the world yet to be, which is the world that we're projecting from where we are now? And that notion of the network, at the moment, I think, is a depoliticized notion of contemporary digital culture that needs to be politicized, and it should be politicized in the way we build digital frameworks, the way we build our platforms, and we're not doing well enough, and we need to do it a heap better. And the sorts of things that Honey is initiating need to be taken on board more powerfully than they have been. How do Indigenous knowledge systems conform to the existing ontologies that describe the world on the web? Okay? Appallingly. Right? How do we improve that? How do we actually understand the world as it's lived and experienced by those people who are disempowered by the mainframe ways of describing interrelationships? How do we build new notions of how we connect? How do we make connections? How do we connect? How do we touch each other in a digital context? That's what I want to know, and they're the digital platforms that I want to build. And I don't want to be sitting here talking about me.
I think that's absolutely on the money. First of all, we need to, I suppose, make it more normal to talk about ontology as a process, and as a completely fluid process. I think dynamic ontologies and dynamic systems of constructing political
and contestable ontologies.
Exactly, they need to be revisable. This is something that we also kind of hold to in the manifesto. I'm not sure how explicit we make it in the actual text, but this idea that you can commit to a particular set of normative frameworks. You can propose them as, just to take one step back, the importance of the trans aspect is first of all that The trans gives you a very immediate example of the fulcrum between what is and what ought to be or what could be. So you have instantly, like when you're talking about women, trans women who don't have uteruses and vice versa, you instantly kind of get an experience of that disconnection, and that opens up a whole space of possibility to hack into these.
And I want to make the point that that's a profoundly queer position, in that it's, the paradox is that it's utterly transgressive but also affirmative at the same time. Like there's this kind of complexity in that is really interesting. Yeah.
It's negating something but affirming its.
But the thing with the vernacular ontology is that how I describe those interrelationships may not be how you do, or how you do, or how I do next week, or how I do last week, but I still want to document what I've understood the world to be today.
Yes, that's why I like photographs.
Beautiful.
Yeah, because it's a way of taking a slice from the chaos and just pulling out and have a look at it, and then move on.
You want to say something, Petra?
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning, and I've heard us kind of approach this, but in section 0x0e of the manifesto, it's made very clear that the project outlined is to be gender abolitionist in a way. I think I have it right here. Yeah. So yes, section 0x0e, it says, gender abolitionism is shorthand for the ambition to construct a society where traits currently assembled under the rubric of gender no longer furnish a grid for the asymmetric operation of power. And that's, personally, where I find the Xeno in the feminism of Xenofeminism. It's not to be gender blind, but to, through the process of technological alienation, reconfigure this grid. And I think in the same section it says, let 100 sexes bloom, and not genders. Those genders have been blooming all along, but with technological alienation, I could have a uterus, right? And that's so could anyone else, and I think that's interesting, or at least a way to make this not so much a gender panel, although we're still using that word.
I think the question then of moving from this this particular idea of what identity is and can be and how it is temporal and constantly changing, then as you're kind of alluding to, needs some kind of concrete political work behind it. And we've tried to kind of lay out an epistemological approach to that, how you would mediate between a kind of a cultural topology. And we use the idea of transmodernity. We don't make this explicit in the manifesto, but it's sitting behind it. Transmodernity, which was a term coordinated by Spanish philosopher Rosa Maria Rodriguez Magda, early 20th century, and then taken up again by the mathematician Fernandez Alamea recently, which kind of talks about using contemporary mathematics as a model for how to mediate between the space of absolute multiple particular sort of postmodern stories that where every story has its own kind of space of articulation, but you don't necessarily have a way to construct with it because of all of the difference. And the kind of like hackneyed Western humanist, modernist idea of a universal, which is what entails all of the kind of history of colonialism. how do you kind of mediate between these two spaces and actually have a constructive dynamic epistemology which can build, he uses the term glue, can glue particulars together in a way that doesn't drown out their difference, but that can find, he uses category theory as a way to model this, which I don't pretend to understand myself, but some of the women who I've collaborated with on this are logicians and know this very well. I'm kind of taking it on their explanation of it. To find invariances between these differences. So you have a cultural space and a value system that you can work on. You can build commitment out of that. It's always revisable. That's the kind of, I suppose, assurance that it won't become tyrannical. And you use these spaces to then generate like political action, build platforms, or repurpose platforms.
Okay, so I have a name for this.
Yeah.
Okay. So most of what we deal with in digital builds is what's called infrastructure. Okay? Digital infrastructure, name of the game. We're all engaging in it at some level. We all are immersed in it at some level. I advocate for something for intervention which I call infrapuncture, which is infrastructure plus acupuncture. It's kind of like a compendium term, which is this idea that you find the points of stress in the system and you apply alleviation to those points, and you hope that those points then radiate out to greater benefit in the surrounding areas. So infrapuncture is something I think that feminists have done over the years in different ways, and we can now apply that to digital infrastructure. I think queer politics have done this. I think it gives a notion of agency to individuals in an environment where that's often lost. So infrapuncture is a really lovely way to think about the influence that the right person in the right place at the right time might have. And we see it happening around us in lots of different ways. So crowdfunding is a great example of infrapuncture, okay? Where you mobilise at a small level a large number of people for greater benefit. And so there's lots of these interventions occurring at the moment. And I think it's a notion of trying to politicise and what often seems an overwhelmingly, counterproductive, misogynist kind of framework that we operate in at the digital level.
I think that's like, a whole different kind of way of talking about that approach, but I think there's something really similar in that it's about coordinating, as you say, a kind of sense of local agency with then a larger scale effect or a kind of ripple effect. And I think this is a really important thought to hold on to, however you want to kind of structure it conceptually, is how do you connect something that people have traction on and purchase on in their own space, but then is not limited to that. Because I think we need to act, and we need to build things to have some kind of global purchase, essentially, or working at least in a kind of meso space between the market and the market. So I think that's a really important demand for any kind, not just feminism, but I think feminism is like kind of covers all pertinent political acts that can be made at the moment, because if you're going towards some kind of idea of equality, you have to go through feminism. That might be a bit polemical, but I'm just going to put that out there. And this needs to happen, this way of thinking about structures.
It's moving beyond our own understanding what the female body is all about. It's what xenofeminism represents to me, at least. It challenges my own understanding what being a female means. You know, it's just like redefining for me what it means to be a female. And on that note, we must say that we have Holly joining us. And I just want to remind us all that everything we're doing here comes from Holly. So it's true. Everything, the whole discussion comes from Holly Herndon's platform. That was the invitation that Bruce Sterling, anyway, and we had Cat Hope, who was a musician, and that okay, we have Holly here. So it comes from a female. So I don't think it's fair to call it male aesthetics when it's.
Is that us finished then? Can we go get a drink now?
Yeah, you can go get a drink. There she is. Thank you so much, everyone. And we have Holly over there. Bruce, you have to stay here because you have to stay. Everybody's
at the bar.
No, that's not a panel right now. That's just you and Holly.
Sorry, Holly.
Okay. Can you listen to us, Holly?
Yes,
Are you
I can.
listening?
Can you
I
hear
have a
me?
microphone here.
Yeah, you can. We can hear you. Yeah. So anyway, everything that's happening today comes from you.
Oh,
Really.
come on.
You know, because no, seriously. There was this you know that article that was published in the Fader about platform. Do you remember this article? It was like 10 radical ideas behind Holly Herndon's platform.
Yes.
You remember that article?
Yes, by Ruth
And-
Zachary.
Exactly. And she was like doing the exegesis of platform. Like the 10 researchers that you were talking to for each track in the album. And this is how this whole thing started, right? Because we read that article, and Bruce was coming to Australia, and we didn't know what topic to talk to him about, you know? So I sent him that article, and I said, Bruce, check this out. Holly Herndon's platform, Alien Aesthetics, that's what we should be talking about right now. That's it, you know, we should come to Australia and we should discuss Holly Herndon's platform. And he was like, yeah, let's talk about Holly Herndon. So I'm going to let him explain to you why he wanted to talk about you.
Well, you know, it was pleasant to have something topical. And, you know, I also saw you present at Sonar in Barcelona. So, you know, I know where you are coming from to an extent. And, I don't know, it's one doesn't like to travel so many time zones without something a little bit crunchy to deal on. And, you know, thank you for getting up at an ungodly hour in Berlin. I hope you're staying up after a gig rather than getting up early in the morning. But your ears would have been burning if you had heard us discussing you earlier. But you know, I like you know what you were doing with the machine. You know, I like the concept of platform a lot, and I think it has wide applications outside music or pop music. And you know, that always interests me. I mean, I'm not a musicologist. I don't write for Fader. I'm not a music critic, but you know, I have in fact paid real money for your album, and listened to it repeatedly. And you know, I'm happy to praise you. And you know, I think you should be heard among wider circles than you are heard.
Well, I'm hugely flattered by all of this praise. Thank you so much. I can't take all of the credit. Of course, Platform was a collaborative effort, so I was fortunate to be able to work with a large group of wonderful artists and thinkers from many different fields. So yeah, I'll say thank you on their behalf as well. I did listen in a little bit to the link that was sent to me. I guess it was you guys earlier today, and someone brought up the idea of process as maybe being interesting.
That was me.
Ah, okay, good job. Yeah, because I think that that's probably one of the things that I'm most interested in, or maybe something that I think somebody asked you, Bruce, like what makes this different, and I think process is probably the best answer to that question. So a lot of that has to do with creating custom software, so that I'm not necessarily relying on another engineer's vision of what something should sound like. Also, as a vocalist, being able to kind of like liberate my voice beyond its physical abilities. My voice is what it is, but I can make it into so much more, and I can, there's a lineage of female voices, especially in electronic music, going through kind of a male production filter. So to be able to have complete control over what my voice sounds like, to make it ugly or aggressive or huge or soft or sweet or whatever I want it to be,
and for that to just go through my filter is hugely liberating. So I think that's another big part of my process. Obviously, is working with the voice and trying to find new ways to make the voice connect with people. I think that's kind of like how I came to using the voice in the first place, is because I was making laptop music at Mills and performing with the laptop, and a lot of people were saying that there was this kind of like disembodiment happening, or they felt that laptop performance was disembodied or not engaging in some way. So to me, it was like this immediate answer of like, okay, if I put my own voice into this machine, then people will have a way of interacting with it, and it becomes kind of like immediately accessible or immediately clear to people that it is an embodied performance, and I am physically there engaging in the same time and space as the audience. I'm just kind of rambling. Is there any kind of form here?
No, this is perfect. Please go on,
just
go on.
Staring into the screen. It's like, well, if you stare into the screen long enough, the screen will stare back into you. As Nietzsche used to say, yeah. To react to that, let me thank you for not like flattening your voice or vocodering it or like shredding it or turning it into some kind of alien thing. I think it does serve as a kind of gateway into an area of laptop music which is hard to access because it's genuinely novel. So I don't think I would like to listen to a Holly Herndon extended dance track mix without the voice. Because although you're doing very novel things with the music, it's hard to parse. But with the voice on it, I think it's I don't know. I wouldn't call it easy listening by any means, but it's like it just has impact, just more depth that way.
Yeah.
When I listened to it, I remembered the old dictum of Andre Breton to the surrealist movement, that you could distort and surrealize everything in a surrealist painting except the female form. If you drew a woman had to be shaped like a woman in the text. And it's strange, but you're not allowed to. And Dali refused to do that, and that's one of the reasons he was drummed out of the regiment. Strange business, but it really worked. It made the surrealism accessible. I don't know why. Maybe Andre knew. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that the voice is a really clear way to do that. But I also try to do that in other ways. Like I think certain kind of like rhythmic tropes, or like even I like to mix familiar and alien together because I think it it creates this entry point. I feel like I'm coming from like a very niche kind of experimental background. And it took me a while to kind of come to terms with wanting to involve pop as a form and also pop elements into my music. And I finally figured out that the reason why I was so interested in that, and the reason why it made sense, is because I actually am interested in the communication that pop as a format. So if you're able to create some sort of a framework that has aspects of familiarity, then you can really introduce people to your extreme alien side. Once you've already kind of won them over with the familiar, then you can bring in the kind of extreme alien side, and then people are open. They're almost like primed and open for it. I spent plenty of times going to concerts where like the best thing or like the coolest thing you could do was like turn everyone off and like make everyone really upset and leave the concert. Like that was really cool for me for a while, and then eventually I realized that actually I didn't hate my audience. I really wanted to have a relationship with my audience and communicate, and have it be kind of a back and forth. So, yeah.
Well, that's the Lou Reed and Laurie Anderson saga. That's Lou Reed composing metal machine music specifically so they can, like, piss off the recording industry and make people leave the room. And then it's Laurie Anderson who, like, records 300 copies of Oh Superman on vinyl, and then gets like a phone call at 2 in the morning from Britain. We need some of this record of yours, this Oh Superman thing. It's like getting radio play. Okay, fine. How many do you need? 300,000.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's tough. That's like an actual a hard bridge to cross.
Holly, did you listen to the part when Bruce compares you to Laurie Anderson?
I
And
did
he
hear
said
that.
that. Did you hear that?
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
Let me put it this way: it's better than being compared to Delia Derbyshire. Okay, like Laurie ended well and Delia did not.
No, I find that hugely flattering. You know, she's coming from kind of like an art world, performance art background. I definitely resonate with that. She also has an academic side that I certainly resonate with. It's funny, the music industry works in a very kind of bizarre way that, especially for women or minorities, it's like there's like a certain set of acceptable kind of, what do you call them, like icon figures or whatever that you can fit into. Like women are allowed to be like, you know, like a folk goddess or like, you know, like a synth god. There's all these kind of like, you know, different boxes that you're allowed to fit into. And I certainly have tried to create my own, what's the word I'm looking for? Archetype, thank you.
Archetype.
Yes, archetype. I'm trying to create my own kind of archetype because I feel like every time someone comes along and creates their own kind of archetype, and this is really, it's probably a lot easier in other fields. In music, it's extremely difficult. People really want you to be a version of something before. But I feel like every time someone comes along and creates a new archetype, it then makes more space and creates more kind of like points in between the wider points where people can then express their true selves. So yeah, I do find that hugely inspiring, but I also hope that I am forming my own archetype and not just kind of Laurie Anderson 2015.
I know it's painful to be compared to earlier artists, but I've had that happen myself. And, you know, you will outlive it. And that's kind of the sad part. It's like, you'll get to the point where somebody says, oh, well, you know, I've like read this, that, and the other. And you say, oh, well, yeah, I was like imitating my mentor so-and-so. And they've never heard of him or her. You know? Because literally they're just dead and like gone. And, you know, Lou Reed is dead. And, you know, he was a great artist, but his fame will fade. No, I mean, there will be people who understand him, but he will never be, you know, the icon of the Velvet Underground that he was when he was the icon of the Velvet Underground. You know, it may take 25 or 30 years, but eventually I think you will find it a comfort. Like somebody will say, yeah, she was like Laurie Anderson. Who? Like, okay, well, I remember Laurie Anderson. You know, it's like the little flame is still alive in my beating heart. And, you know, later in life, it becomes a nourishing thing. I mean, you know, comparisons are invidious, but you know, believe me, time will heal that wound.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't a complaint. And of all people to be compared to, Laurie Anderson's a really great. That's a great archetype to be slotted into.
You could do a lot worse. Really. There's a long history of women who are, you know, well, actually, there's just a long history of electronic people in particular and kind of sound artists and so forth who are like, I mean, it's rare for them to have, it's rare for somebody as radical, as conceptually and like procedurally radical as yourself to like have a bridge into the pop world, you know, or to achieve any kind of, you know, recognition of that kind. And I don't know, it's going to require a lot of metis and kind of political skill to deal with, because it really is an unusual thing. And you're right that the industry will put you in boxes, but I think you're going to outlive today's industry. And the means by which music is distributed and heard is going to change very radically. And you know, you strike me as somebody who might thrive under an industry which is not like today's, which is not the case for most of your I don't know, contemporaries who are like really fighting over a dwindling pie. You know, I mean, they're living off soft drink companies and shoe companies.
It's very true.
Red Bull Music Academy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why my practice is so diverse. You know, like I do sound installation work for art institutions. I'm pursuing my doctorate right now. I play clubs. I play concerts. You know, it's like And a lot of that has to do with the kind of precarity of the music industry as we know it. And, you know, in some ways it's a curse because I have, like, you know, 5 full-time jobs and I'm constantly, like, I'm never sleeping. But in another way, it's also way more fulfilling because it forces me to be more flexible. It forces me to look outside of the music world and collaborate with people in other fields, which then in turn makes the music more engaging and more interesting. It definitely makes me. It forces me to kind of reject this idea of the musician as genius in this kind of bubble, which is something I've been thinking a lot about in the last couple of years. You know, I was really flattered to be welcomed onto this kind of like experimental music scene where I was being flown around the world to play concerts and things like that, and that was all very exciting. And then I started to kind of question or wonder what kind of the greater implication of that was, or you know, how could I make this mean something beyond the niche musical community that I was reaching immediately? And that's kind of one of the things that led to Platform, the ideas behind Platform. Was really kind of like searching for extra musical ideas or things that could give music agency again, or make it more proactive again. You know, and it, you know, music is very political in a lot of communities, a lot of groups. So I don't want to, I'm not speaking for all music. I'm speaking just for my own community. But yeah, that was kind of one of the things that I think pushed the Platform to where it eventually ended up.
Well, let me express my passionate solidarity for that. And, you know, I often wonder when I look at contemporary musicians, would this person be an important artist if there was no music industry? And, you know, there aren't very many of whom that can be said because they really kind of live in the box. And it's like asking, would this novelist be an important figure if there were no publishers? And there are a few people, writers, of whom I think you could say yes, you know. And, you know, our platform dependence is like, well, it's like part of that problem, right? But you are a lot closer to the coalface there than I am. And, you know, may God bless you, really. I mean, may your efforts be crowned with success. You know, they will take some form that I don't understand, but, you know, I am behind you to the extent that I can do it, really.
Oh, look, Holly, you should come to Casa Jasmina, right? Which is this house that Bruce and his wife Jasmina, they are having this space in Turin, Italy, and it's a space for artists, designers, thinkers to go there and actually create things, and you should go there.
It sounds amazing.
If not to compose, just to think and exchange ideas and all of that. I just have one question for you before you go to Casa Jasmina, maybe after your tour. Okay. Because what I love about your work is the process, okay? I'm fascinated about collaborative processes of creative practice. I'm really fascinated by that. And I'm also a practitioner myself, and I know it can be really hard to translate an idea or a concept into an aesthetics. I know how hard it can be. And can you tell us a little bit about how it is for you to go from an abstraction, a political idea or way of seeing the world, and to translate that into sound? How does that work for you?
You know, it's like, I think it's like with anyone's practice, it's like a lot of kind of like blind searching and self-loathing and failure, and then somehow finding something that works. But I'm really interested in having the process be tied to the conceptual framework of whatever it is that I'm working on. You know, like a lot of my work is dealing with technology. So if I'm going to be talking about technology, I want to be using technology in a way that can speak to it as well. not just with the text, but also with the means of production. Because I think that has a profound impact on the aesthetics, and I think there shouldn't be such a disconnect there, which I think happens often in music. So, like for example, with Home, which is a song that I wrote about the NSA spying on us, and so I did a lot of kind of surveillance where I was recording myself, spying on myself, and using some of the sound material from that to create some of the sound collage elements in that track. So I try to kind of like build in conceptual things from whatever I'm working on into the actual production technique. And I think that has a profound impact on the overall aesthetic. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much.
It was a good answer.
It was a good answer.
Thanks, guys.
Do you want to say anything, Jason? I think Jason has something to say right now. Do you?
I think, actually, I think Derek Hales had a question. Do you want to articulate that, Derek?
Yeah, I can do. Sorry, yeah. I was just thinking about, well, a couple of things, but one was there's been a lot of discussion about process, but the processes seem quite familiar in a sense that they're like old, not old, but like cyborgian kind of prostheses. Earlier on, we talked about like vision being like the aesthetics of vision, the mediation of the aesthetics of vision, and in Holly's work, Bruce, you were talking about like the kind of algorithmic mediation of the voice, and I'm just trying to kind of understand how as a sort of cyborgian aesthetic, or whether they're the same thing, whether we're talking about the same thing, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think he dropped out somewhere in cyberspace there. He seems to have frozen.
Okay.
That's all right. You know, I like the sort of encounter with the grain of the material on that platform album. And there are aspects of it that actually sound like somebody's stuck inside the laptop. Kind of like, okay, it's a nightmare. It's just nobody in here except me and the National Security Agency. Just kind of an awesome place to be. You know, that's a good part of the process, I think. It's like, okay, here I am using this device. It's like about this device. You know, that seems to be the way forward, although I don't think laptops in their present state will last very long.
Well, I think a lot of stuff I was doing was trying to kind of fuse the digital and the physical, so maybe that kind of speaks to your cyborg versus alien comparison. Yeah, I don't even know how we want to define alien here, or how we want to distinguish between these two, but for me, and for the work that I was doing there, I was really trying to, you know, a lot of digital music is like, even like glitch music, when it's not like pristine, it still has like a clear kind of defined edge to the sound. Like it can almost be grid-like. And so with the digital music that I want to do, or that I do, is I try to find like the messy kind of human side to things. And so I fuse a lot of field recording sounds from the world around me. Like I'll you know, slam the refrigerator and record that, or I'll hire dancers and have one drag the other across the floor and take that dragging sound and add that to a track. I like staging these kind of like physical moments, and then in that, processing that and fusing that into the digital world so that they're the messiness of our world. Like my desktop right now, if you guys can see it, is like super messy. There's files everywhere. It's like totally unorganized, just like my suitcase in the corner, which is exploded, and there's like socks everywhere. So these worlds, I I like to see them both as being like very human and domestic and lived in. And so, yeah, I think kind of trying to find the fleshy side to the digital music was always like a top priority for me. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it is cyborgian instead of alien if we look at it from that perspective.
Okay, thanks.
He's got a bad connection. Yeah, you know, I'm very sympathetic to glitch, but to have glitch, you have to presume that there's a correct version of it, and like the glitch is a mistake or a recording error or some kind of, you know, breakdown in what's considered normality, and that's limiting because you're sort of saying, okay, I'm the glitch and I'm opposed to what's actually there. Whereas if you go out and like recording dancers being dragged around, yeah. It's like, you know, just a direct encounter with lived experience, which is not a glitch at all. You know, it's just like something that's not normally on a record, and that seems to be like much more the way forward. You know, I'm kind of a fan of glitch. I like listening to glitchcore, which is just music that's made up of nothing but recording errors. But you know, to use only errors is like to enslave yourself to the correct. You haven't really seized the means of production. You've only seized the means of misproduction or broken production. So, you know, I see that as a period artifact. I think glitch will go away as people realize that the material that glitch is breaking stuff is not as interesting as actually making stuff.
Or it becomes another tool in the toolbox. Like I use glitch as something added, you know, as an element to a track that maybe has 10 elements. You know what I mean? Like I love glitch too, but it still does have this kind of like it still does have, like, especially digital glitch has like this specific kind of timbre. It's not, it's never really dull or kind of like muddy or earthy in that way. And so, you know, I would like to take like something that's like super glitchy and mix that with something that's, you know, very clearly like a fist slapping a thigh or something. You know, just to kind of bring them together and have them live in the same universe. I think that, yeah, our production techniques really allow us a way to create new fantasies and to create these kind of like new worlds that we want to see. Someone who I find really inspiring is a producer from the 50s and 60s called Joe Meek. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Bruce, I could see you being into him.
People in the audience are quite the Meek fans, apparently.
Yeah, so he's a production pioneer, but he made this amazing record called I Hear a New World, and you know, super alien sounding, I'm sure, to the people at the time. But you know, thinking of him as a figure, you know, kind of like marginalized queer male producer from the 50s and 60s, imagining this other kind of world or this kind of like new fantastical soundscape. You know, that's hugely inspiring. And that's something that I think I'm also trying to do, is like trying to find, trying to give music agency to, instead of just criticize what I don't like, to have some sort of, to have some sort of agency and be able to fantasize and imagine what I want things to be like or I want things to sound like. I think music has that capability.
Well, glitch is like breaking and picking on something. It's like, oh, it's perfect, and I'm going to hit it with my hammer, and then like photograph the dent mark. But you know, I actually do wonder about an alien aesthetics of music, and like, how could you make a form of music that no human being could ever make? And I think there's like a number of efforts that people have done that, and mostly they've just, you know, they've done sampling, like sampling insects, sampling whale song, sampling galactic bursts of, you know, electromagnetism and like moving it into sound. But you know, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking that there might be sound production systems or algorithms that would put stuff together that we just wouldn't think of, that would nevertheless be musical. And I don't mean the kind of phony baloney music composition systems that like imitate Mozart because they've like sampled all the notes. I find those banal. Just I would like to hear a kind of music that like no human brain that could produce that was nevertheless musical.
I think a really awesome example of that is John Chowning. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a composer. He was a researcher at Karma at Stanford, and he, I guess you would say, discovered FM synthesis there, which he also patented and went into the, all of the Yamaha digital synthesizers of like the late 70s and 80s and 90s. Anyway, so when he started working with FM synthesis, these were literally timbres that no human ear had heard before because they don't exist in nature, but he created them for the first time. And being a composer, he composed them into really beautiful works. One of them is called Stria, is one of the early works. And when you hear it, of course, I don't know what it's like to hear it with ears from 1975 or whatever, because I wasn't born then, but I imagine that it sounded probably very alien. Because those timbres had, in fact, never been heard before. I think it's really rare that you come across those things, that someone's able to, create a new technology that makes something that outside of anything we've ever heard before. That's the best example.
I'm gonna pass the stick to Jason now. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
The talking stick.
Okay, so I think we're going to kind of wrap it up with this question, and then we're going to have some DJ sets and stuff. And thanks a lot for coming on, Holly. We really appreciate it. And sorry for the confusion earlier. So my question is basically about, I was trying to think of how to connect this a little bit to the Xenofeminist Manifesto, because there's part of that where they talk about the importance of thinking of reason as the right to speak as no one in particular, not to speak as a man being the typical kind of like history of kind of patriarchal reason, or seeing reason as something that is implicitly patriarchal, nor the reverse in responding to that with a feminized reason, but rather to actually speak as no one in particular. Beyond embodiment, beyond gender in general. And so I'm just kind of thinking of how this might connect to your approach to alien aesthetics, in which you say that important part of it for you is combining experimental alien sound with pop music and allowing people a way into your work. How does this desire to allow people a way into the alien that kind of meets them where they're at, but also is not really addressed to anyone in particular, but maybe it is still somewhat. How do you relate that to gender and I guess a kind of more radical gender politics?
Well, I didn't catch the entire the Xenofeminism talk, but I did read the manifesto that was online a couple months ago, and I remember coming across I hope that I'm getting this right, because this is I'm just spitballing here, but I think that there was one part that said something about where nature fails us. Was that one of the points in the manifesto?
Yeah, something like where nature fails, remake nature, or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that point really popped out to me on the page, because I really feel like that's something that I'm trying to do with the music that I'm writing, where the limitations of my physical voice and my physical body have failed me. I'm able to kind of create my own custom vocal manipulation patches to make my voice into whatever I want it to be, and just how incredibly liberating and beautiful that is. So I think that's like, to me, that's the intersection of these two worlds in a most clear way.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for coming. And I think we're going to have some DJ sets now, and Ivan Nikolai will be one of them, so I'm looking forward to that.
We're going to listen to some of your tracks now.
And
Bruce Sterling is going to be a DJ, and he's going to play Platform for us right now.
Cool.
So that's guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Holly, you be well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye-bye. All right, now it's party time. Party time, excellent.
Go.
Is that a bar?
Yeah, I believe they're at an after-hours club.
What's that?
I believe they're at like a club.
Oh yeah, that's right. It is a bar. The whole thing is a bar. I forgot.
Do we stick around for the music? Are we recording it?
Are we what? No, we don't have to stick around.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the
I was planning on dancing.